I was going to say. Doesn't look like we can monetize that.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the February 21st, 2018 meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. Before we get started with our regular agenda tonight, we'll do a few housekeeping items, including and starting with the approval of the minutes from January. We have a motion to approve. Yeah. I will be sure to speak into the microphone.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. We have a motion to approve. Second? Second. Commissioner Culver, thank you. Any discussion about the minutes? All in favor of approval, please raise your hand. 8-0, 1 abstention. Let's see. Do we have any committee reports from the last month? Any written communications from the public that are not in the packet already? Okay. Do we have any written communication from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
Mr. Chair, I might note a couple of items. One is that we are recommending that the commission consider moving item numbers 3A and 3B up to your first item. I think when we deferred this a couple of months ago, we made a declaration in the meeting that it would be the first item. Since they had to sit through some of that meeting as well, I think, to get to those deferred items. And also just take an opportunity to note that Sheila Stogsdill, who has spent the greater part of 30 years with the city shaping our built environment in the planning office, is retiring, I think you know, in March, and this is her last formal meeting with us today.
She'll be back.
She'll be back. She'll be back on the other side of the podium like so many often do. But you'll see more formal celebrations announced here very soon, but did want to have a moment of gratitude for Sheila and all of her years of experience during her last meeting. So we really appreciate the work.
I would definitely second that and give a great thanks to Sheila and the hard work she's done. I know I speak for all the commissioners when I extend that very serious gratitude to Sheila for all the work she's done. And congratulations.
The smile hasn't left the face since she made the
You can see the permagrin creeping onto there right now. All right. We will take a motion to move item 3 when we get to the main agenda. Do we have any written action of waiver requests or determinations from the city engineer?
No, sir.
Any disclosure of ex parte communications? These are communications that the commissioners have received that are not in our general package, so that all commissioners and the public can know what communications we have received given on a certain item. Commissioner Sands.
Yes, I spoke to Matt Goff, applicant representative for, I think, item number 2, the 6th and Monterey project. We talked about 3 things primarily. I had questions about the volume of water that would be moving into the storm stormwater. He said that we discussed the water circulation system that I'm sure they'll present as part of the packet, and the amount of water not trapped in the system that may go into the stormwater drain would be negligible in his assessment. I asked him about neighborhood outreach, and they did do some neighborhood outreach, and we talked about, they did a limited amount of neighborhood outreach. We did talk about noise study. As part of the packet, I think it has the 2018 noise study that the applicant's franchise company commissioned. At the time that they did their outreach, though, they did not have access to that, or they did not know about that information, so they were using an older 10-year-old noise study for that. And then he did mention additional green space, which I think is probably going to be part of the presentation.
Thank you. Any further ex parte communications? All right. Any items from which any commissioner must abstain tonight? All right, then seeing none, we'll move on to our main agenda. And as Scott mentioned, I would entertain a motion to move item 3A and B to the start of our agenda tonight. Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. Second by Commissioner Carpenter. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And we will start with item 3A, rezoning at 5275 West 6th Street.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Catherine Week. I'm going to present item 3A and 3B to you tonight. This is for a rezoning and a preliminary development plan for Beckhouse Townhomes. This is located out on West 6th Street. Here's the location map for you. It's just to the west of Wakarusa Drive, about halfway between Wakarusa and George Williams Way. This would be the area map showing the highlighted parcel in turquoise there. To give you a general idea of the intersection, it's at Queens Road to the north of 6th Street. It's Branchwood Drive to the south. So it is in the southeast corner, that parcel that we're talking about. Current zoning in the area, just to make a note, this is parcel is currently zoned UR. The zoning in the area is primarily residential. There is some multifamily zoning to the west, some single-family zoning to the east, and a planned residential development also to the south, which is primarily single-family homes. The property to the north is still zoned UR, as it was when the adoption of the 2006 Land Development Code was adopted. That UR zoning landed on that parcel and the properties to the north. So this proposed rezoning is to take that UR zoning to RM12-PD, which would be a PD or Planned Development Overlay District. Those permitted uses, as it specifies in the section relating to planned developments, is that the base district would apply, which would be RM12 in this case, and then this particular proposal is for independent multi-dwelling living. And there would be private recreation space for the residents on that parcel as well. The reason for using a planned development overlay is to ensure some design flexibility and control, and to ensure that the compatibility of design with that area is compatible. And as I said, this is primarily residential, and that was one of the concerns when you originally saw this rezoning to RMO, that it was probably more suitable to have a planned development overlay to ensure that compatibility, which is why you're seeing it this way tonight. This is just a sketch provided with the preliminary development plan showing a proposal for what it could potentially look like. They're proposing 6 structures that are 2 stories in height and 2 dwelling units per structure, so a total of 12 dwelling units for the development. Again, these are sketches that are provided with the planned development plan. These are not fully articulated. So some key points to consider for this UR to RM12 PD rezoning. So UR, as I said, is a special purpose district, and that came into effect with the adoption of the 2006 Land Development Code. This particular parcel was annexed in 2001, and the UR district is a district that's sort of a placeholder that keeps potential development from occurring that the property has not yet been zoned, and so to eliminate things developing improportional to what is the compatible area, a UR district is placed on that until time of development. And so this came in, like I said, in 2001, and the UR zoning district was applied in 2006 with the adoption of the Land Development Code. This rezoning would allow development consistent with the area and fit the goals of the comprehensive plan. Again, this is primarily residential area, and they are proposing an RM12 multifamily, which is medium to low, or low to medium multifamily zoning district for this area. So again, you heard this in November under a different rezoning proposal. It was to go to RMO. They've reevaluated, resubmitted the application, and now presenting an alternative, which is the RM12 PD with the plan development. So our review criteria, we want to ensure that it conforms with the future plans for the area or the comprehensive plan, that it is similar in zoning to the use as the nearby properties, and it's compatible with the character of the neighborhood. Again, they reduced from an RMO down to RM12, which is compatible with what is currently planned for this area, for the comprehensive plan, and the current existing neighborhoods. So also suitability of the property for the uses to which it has been restricted. Currently, it could only develop as the single-family house that currently resides on there today, or convert back to agriculture, which is not compatible with what is currently happening in that location. This property, as I said, is not vacant. It currently has a single-family home, and they're proposing a multifamily development. And then we also consider the impact of approving or denying the rezoning request. And I will show you some concerns, as were mentioned prior, that the neighborhood has for this area. Part of your communications was a list of those concerns from the neighborhood area residents. And those concerns, as discussed previously and to date, they're still the same concerns, are distances to property lines, retaining trees on the property and landscaping, the location and regulation of garbage collection, easements and infrastructure in those locations, how does that impact what's there and what is needed to provide for that development, fencing and maintenance, and lighting, and detailed plans. As we have yet seen, there are not detailed plans. We have concept plans currently, or concept elevations. Staff is recommending the rezoning request from UR to the RM12 PD, and to forward this on to the City Commission with recommendation for approval. And then tying into the preliminary development plan, so this is a image from the preliminary development plan that was submitted. I've highlighted the access off of Branchwood Drive and the internal access to this development. It is all internally located. The driveways would be off the internal drive, and the structures would have internal circulation throughout that development. I've also included a slide showing the landscape, the open space, the existing trees. I've tried to delineate between what are existing, as represented in the plan, the darker green trees along the east and south are existing trees, which they're proposing to maintain and supplement as needed where there may be gaps or holes. And then the lighter green areas would be the street trees that are being provided. There's also shrubbery being provided at locations where that parking access and drive will face a property line, so they've added buffering there for that. So staff is also recommending that we forward the preliminary development plan to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed. I just want to go over some of those conditions. Those would be in the staff report as noted. There's some plan notes that need to be changed, a couple minor housekeeping things, and then there's a vacation of permanent easement that they are proposing. Vacation of that easement would need to go before the City Commission for vacation. The submittal of the public improvement plans prior to the final development plan, and then subject of the city commission approval of the rezoning request, which we talked about just a moment ago. And the next steps, if you should approve this and move it forward to the city commission, they would have to approve of the rezoning, and then the final development plan and final plat would come back before you, or I'm sorry, would be administrative, but that would be the opportunity to finalize those plans, elevations, and then building permits would be the next step after that. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions if you have some.
Thank you, Catherine. I'll let you know if we have any. Is there a representative of the applicant here tonight?
Good evening, my name is Robert Wilson. I'm the owner of Beckmeisters LLC. I've been in construction since 1983. In the last 11 years, I'm owner and operator of Bridgehaven Memory Care, which specializes in senior care for people affected with Alzheimer's. So my passion is more on the senior side in the construction. A couple notable projects I've been involved with in Lawrence over the years is 10th in Kentucky. There's a stone church built in 1886 by J.G. Haskell, and I restored those to condominiums. And then next door to Merchants above Francisco's, I believe, is a 2,300 square foot single family home, which I spent 19 months restoring to its original. And I do believe in high quality and that sort of thing. I wasn't here last time for medical reasons, and I've chosen Paul Warner to represent me from here forward. I also have the engineer tonight who can help with technical questions based on the site plans and such. I did bring some color conceptions of the building. I'd like to explain a little bit more about them if I could. Does this work?
Yes, it does. I would just ask that you speak into the microphone if you can. Might be able to bring the
Can you hear
podium
me
up a
now?
little bit.
Okay. So there's, again, this is conceptual, and there could be a little bit of movement, but this is the direction I'm going. The south buildings and the east buildings, the ones that face the current fences, will be slab on grade, single story, and they'll be about 1,400 square foot apiece. The advantage of these over what I see in Lawrence is as people get older, they accumulate more stuff. And so this has more storage. Typical garage, double garage door would be 16 feet. This has 18 feet, so you can pull cars in and you could swing your doors nicely without smacking into the other car. It also has deeper garages. The master bedroom also has an ADA style or approved bathroom with no lip showers. It's designed with no steps so that seniors can age in place. That's what all the seniors want to do. So it's geared towards senior lifestyle. I'm gearing it towards 55 and up, but I'm not going to discriminate for anybody younger than 55 who could live in these homes. The two homes that are to the west are going to have walkout basements. So the backside, it does appear as if it's a two-story, but the elevation is right here. So from the street level, it's all one-level homes, and then you have a walkout basement for the ones where the land slopes towards the street. Anyway, that's our conception. The other change we've made since the last meeting is we're not going to go with a clubhouse. The center area is going to be a garden area. It's one of the 2 recreational areas where there'll be a koi pond and a picnic table and maybe a gazebo or something like that. So it's a community meeting area. And then to the south east corner will be a playground for kids or grandkids. So do you have any questions for me before I bring up the engineer to ask me to entertain any technical questions?
I don't. If we have any after the engineer's presentation and public comment? we'll ask
Sorry.
you.
Okay. So I'd like to bring up Dean Grobe.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, good evening, Commissioners. Dean Grobe, Grobe Engineering. I just wanted to hit on a couple topics that I think are important in the staff report, and then try to address a few of the concerns that came from the neighbors. I'll step back and be happy to answer any questions after some of those have had a chance to speak. One of the things in the report that, and again, Catherine did a great job, on the density, that with this particular facility, you think RM12 and immediately everybody thinks, wow, that's a harsh development. Well, with the acreage we've got and the units we've got, the density is less than 5 units per acre in comparison, and very similar to the PRD that's just south of it, has about 5.2 units per acre. So, while it has a little bit different designation, if you look at the units per acre, it's not a typical dense townhome scenario that you might think of. I know a couple of and then I'll try and answer a couple of the questions of, there was concerns about the utilities since I came on board, and to back up a little bit, with the previous plan that you may have saw, utilities around the perimeter between this facility and the adjoining neighbors. I have changed that to kind of go around in the right-of-way or adjacent to the right-of-way, both on the west side and the east side. So the need to run underground sewer around the perimeter, which because of the hillside would have gotten quite deep and had a potential for a lot of removal of trees, I've changed that. So right now around the perimeter, where we're not anticipating removing as few trees as possible on our property, there may be some trimming, but the only utility that may be in that easement that we're providing may be Westar only, or phone and cable only, because they have boxes in the adjacent easement that there wouldn't have to, through that easement would not have to be a new service. They may just pull off of that. So again, that destruction or disturbance of that area is pretty critical. One of the other items, they questioned the trash collection. We originally started with a trash dumpster, and then decided because of the facility and those that would be residents, it's going to be poly carts, and the covenants which are being developed would require normal storage in the garages, that they'll only be carted out to the curb during collection days. So you're not going to, some say, well, you're going to have poly carts, but they're going to be sitting everywhere. So there would be a covenant, the restriction that those are stored in the garage. Given the size of the homes, they're probably going to be small ones. They're most likely not going to be the 95 cubic feet ones that end up being outside because of their size. So I think there was a concern about lighting. The proposed plan is to, for the most part, all the lighting would be on the buildings, with the exception of in that center island or, kind of wayfinding. There may be some, careful with the word accent lighting, but some lighting just, for wayfinding, not necessarily what you would kind of anticipate with a big parking lot. And with that, with the fact, the design that in essence, all the parking lot is for the most part on the inside. So you don't have a bunch of parking around the perimeters that the neighbors have to look at. The fencing, I think they questioned the fencing. There was a comment, I believe, about an easement for fencing. There is a covenants and restriction for the property to the south because it is a PRD. There isn't to the east because it's standard RS7 zoning. Don't plan to put any fencing on the south or on the east, where most of those properties all have their own fencing. We'll probably have some fencing, decorative fencing, more of landscape type fencing around the site, but nothing to put up a nasty fence adjacent to the property owners. So there may be some other questions. Again, they will be townhome units, so there will be a homeowners association with covenants and restrictions. So, we think we got a good project. I think with what I've done to kind of eliminate, by good design, some of those concerns with the neighbors. I think we got a good flow. I think we got density down there where it's compatible with the adjacent properties. The rezoning is appropriate for the area. So I think we got a good project, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you. If we have any after public comment, you'll have a chance to respond then.
Very
Thanks.
good.
Now's the time when we open up the discussion for public comment. I ask that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes. If you're speaking for yourself, if you're speaking for a homeowners group or organization, you may be allotted 5 minutes. And after that, the applicant will have a chance to respond to the concerns and comments that we've heard in the public statements. If you would please speak into the microphone, sign in,
sure
and
will.
tell us who you are and where you live.
My name is Judy Dreiling. I live on Branchwood Court. I live directly south of this proposed project. I don't know if you on the commission have seen the actual plat or site plan of this. If not, I would really like to address some setback issues. The west side of the property that will be going along Branchwood Drive will be 25-foot setbacks, 50-foot setbacks on the north from 6th Street to the east, 20-foot setbacks. For us, the neighborhood directly south, the closest, the most visible, the most vulnerable structures and the entrance-exit road are 10 feet from the property line. 10 feet. The road that they want to put in there is the only entrance-exit for all vehicles. This is for residents, for their guests, for trash pickup, mail delivery, other deliveries, service people, repair people, whatever. We will have a road of traffic 10 feet from our property line behind us. I would also then like to comment that that is going to have an effect on our property values. We have 10 homes in that neighborhood. If it affects those of us on the north side, it affects the others on the south side as well, because buyers look at, compare selling prices in the neighborhood. We have 3 different floor plans. If somebody on the other side of the street wants to sell their home, are they really going to get their selling price when they could buy the same floor plan on the south side, on our side of the street, for maybe $20,000 less because of what is behind us? I would also like to comment on an article that was in the Journal World, Friday, January 5th of this year, Chad Lawhorn's Town Talk. He interviewed Robert Wilson, who spoke earlier, one of the main investors. The headline said, "Plans filed again for retiree-oriented project." In that article, and again this evening, Mr. Wilson is indicating that he's not going to be constricted to 65 and older. There's leeway. In the article, he said this might also be attractive to younger childless couples who would want those same amenities. This raises some questions. I don't know if I have ever heard it said, if these are purchased to own, or are these rental? Is it a combination? Also would really like to know the exact intent of the purpose of this development. In the article, Mr. Wilson went on to say that he was responding to and trying to follow through on a goal that he has heard from many leaders, meaning that they want Lawrence to be a destination for retirees. So lastly, I just want to give you a few demographics of those of us who live in that property directly south. There are 10 homes. Many of us moved in the end of our work years, part-time, full-time, because we do have an HOA. Services and things are taken care of with our dues, but a very, inviting community for getting older. Well, in the last 2.5 years, 5 of those homes are now occupied by full-time retirees. We are very concerned about our property value. Also, we 3 of those 5 homes back up directly to this property. The fence is the only thing separating us from structures and a road that's 10 feet from the property. That does mean that we are a segment of the population that Lawrence wants to attract, and we think some consideration should be given to our property values that 10 feet structure in a road from is not addressing. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment?
My name is Tom Carlson, and I live right next door to Judy on Branchwood Court, also on the north side, directly behind this proposed development. You've gotten this list of all of our concerns, and the proposal, as far as we can tell, we're not specifically against rezoning, but we're concerned that we don't have any kind of detailed answers on our questions. For instance, the idea of senior residents versus anybody that comes along. The company supplied an application form back in August of 2017. In the preamble, they said the design is for more independent senior population. That's a little vague, but it indicates to me that it precludes younger people. Section 2 of that application says there should not be any detrimental effect on surrounding single-family properties. And we see a number of issues where this is going to be detrimental. It's going to affect the value of our property. Section 6 of the application says, well, it has a statement that the property, the way it is now, is out of character with the neighborhood. And our feeling is that if this is built as the preliminary layout and the what we have been told happens, we do not believe that that will be in character with the neighborhood either. So all of this proposal has been presented, but it's not going to produce anything that's going to not negatively affect our property values, and that's our major concern, as Judy said. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment?
My name's Michael Dreiling, and Judy's my spouse, and we live in the same place. It would be fair if you put the plat up on the screen so we review it. I don't know why it's not on there. My main objection, and the rest of it, the setback lines. One of those buildings almost in our backyard. It's going to mess up our view. Why don't they conform to the city 35-foot setback line? Why are they getting a break? We didn't. And my suggestion, why don't you just move it 25 feet north? The whole project. That way we'd be in compliance with the setback line on our property. And the way it is, it's going to really devaluate our property. The way, and I don't think any of you'd want a building right in your backyard either. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment, please. Thank you.
I'm Michelle Leeson, and I live on Fox Chase Court. And I may have missed this. Originally, I was sitting in the back, and it was hard to hear. But was there a plan development overlay presented with this so that the structure cannot? Preliminary?
Yeah.
So before you vote on it, would there be a permanent plan development overlay or a final plan development overlay? Because I know at the last meeting, they talked about a structure could go up, I believe it was 45 feet, and I would hate to have that in my backyard.
That was our discussion at the last meeting. The final development plan is a later step in the process that would have another public process. Perhaps Scott can elaborate on that.
Right, so the initial application was just a rezoning, a straight rezoning. Based on that discussion, the commission wanted to compel the applicant to pursue a plan development overlay. So that's where a site plan is overlaid on the zoning in order to address these kinds of issues, so that what you're seeing in the plan is the project that gets built. They can veer in minor ways from that, but the neighborhood will get notice of the final development plan, which shows very specific, the elevations, the parking spaces, the landscaping, pretty much what you see here, just a little more specificity. But this is the time where the commission can address, and by condition, for example, put height requirements or setback requirements on a project where a plan development overlay accompanies the rezoning.
Okay, and what is typical? I know on the east side, which would be behind my house on Fox Chase Court, I think you said it was 20 feet.
Mr. Chair, what I might recommend is that the speaker get the questions out, and the applicant or us under your direction can answer the questions.
I agree. So go ahead with your questions, and we'll have them answered either by the applicant or by staff.
Okay, I just want to know how far from my property line before one of these buildings or
And what is the setback supposed to be? That's what
Right, right.
Those are also my questions, so
yes.
we'll have those questions answered at the end of the public discussion.
Okay. And I'd just like to say I'm glad they're going to preserve or plan to preserve the trees. They did say there were fences on the south and the east. There's no fence on the east behind my property, my neighbors, and another neighbors that back up next to that, and another neighbor who has a partial fence. So I think I would like to request a fence. I prefer it not wooden because they have to be replaced a lot, but I would like to request that there's a fence there separating the property.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further public discussion? All right then. Seeing none, I'd like to bring the applicant or his representative back up to respond to some of these questions we've had here.
I'm going to refer mostly to my engineer on
Sure.
the setbacks and all that. As far as property values, the price point of these are going to be $300,000 to $350,000, which is square footage wise price point is most likely higher than the surrounding neighbors. Across the street is the Village Co-op, which is an apartment complex. It appears like an apartment complex, but you do have to pay a premium to get in, and then you have a monthly charge for that. And I think their price point is also higher than the homes in that neighborhood. Chad Lawhorn's the type of guy that'll write, if you tell him, if you don't, when he called me in January, he was very much in the conceptual stage. I didn't really want to talk to him, but he's the type of guy who's going to write regardless, so I shared with him some. My vision is active seniors, but there is a playground in the south corner, the south east corner. There's a playground for kids or grandkids, and the center area, which shows some parking and it at one time had a clubhouse, is now going to be another green space for kids or grandkids. So I'm guessing more seniors are going to like this just because of the ADA no-lip showers and the wide 36-inch doors in the bedrooms and such than more of the traditional homes. But that's up to the market to bear, and I'm not going to discriminate against kids with families as well as seniors. So with that, let me pass it over to Dean to talk a little bit more about the technical.
Thanks, Robert. I took some notes, but they may not be perfect. I guess I would talk about the access. In the previous plan that you saw before, there was a drive kind of centered up on the property to the west. Well, unfortunately, that didn't take into account that when Branchwood and 6th Street were improved to 4 lanes plus turn lanes, KDOT acquired some right-of-way, and as part of that, provided an access restriction on that property that says, well, one, you can't take access off of 6th Street, and also you can't take off access off of Branchwood within a given distance of the intersection. You can see in the plan that's shown there where the right-of-way is left to be dedicated at the very southwest corner. Just a little bit north of there is where the access restriction requirement was. So once we got to that point, the only option for the city engineer was to line that entrance up across from the entrance into the new Cooperative Village intersection. So that kind of forced us down to that end based on an access restriction for this property. Right now it has a drive kind of midway, which was kind of an agreement that you could keep it there until it's redeveloped, then it has to move. So that kind of put us at the south end. Because of the grades, you'll notice on the one grading plan, there's a pretty significant cut down there, which kind of puts the road below anything to the south. As far as landscaping, I tried to concentrate screening within the buffer where that drive might interfere with the south property. So I made some efforts to try and address that. In terms of the setback requirements, with this PD, we didn't, with a plan development, sometimes you can have options to, well, I want to do this and that, and it's kind of a give and take. We've asked for no modifications for that purpose. We meet the rear and side yard setbacks. I realize that it's a narrow setback, but by the planning code, there's only one rear yard setback, and that's on the east side, where there's 2 homes. So we've followed all the rules with the placement of that house. There's some trees there. Again, it is close, but it does comply with setback requirements. Spoke of moving it north again. Even without the 6th Street corridor, well, without the 6th Street KDOT improvements, 6th Street has a 50-foot setback, which is more than the standard 25-foot because of the corridor setback. So, moving it to north to gain some of that isn't an option because of that enlarged setback from 6th Street. So we've done what we thought we could do. Again, I realize that setback on the south may seem small, but there's just the one unit. It is the back of the house versus the side, but it's still a side yard setback, which we meet the requirements. So I don't know if I've completely addressed all the questions, and if I haven't, holler and I'll try and address those if I can.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, public comment session has been closed. Thank you.
That's not fair.
I'm sorry. With that, we'll bring it back up to the commission. for discussion? Questions for the applicant? Or for staff?
Vice Chair.
Commissioner Willing.
I'll start with a question for staff, just for further clarification on setbacks, on what the requirements are and why they might be different in different settings.
So this is, they're asking for rezoning of RM12 with the PD overlay, so that would use the base district of RM12. So the RM12 setback requirements, there is a side yard setback, internal side yard setback, which would be 5 feet. They're actually over and above on that south side by 5 feet because they're at 10. They do meet the setbacks for rear as well. That would be 25 for the rear, 25 for the front, and it's actually 25 typically for external side yard, but as they stated, the corridor at 6th Street requires more than that, so they're meeting the 50-foot setbacks. So they are meeting their setback requirements for the RM12 base district.
One more clarification on that. You mentioned the back of that south building as it being a side yard setback. Can you explain?
Yeah, so this is being developed as one lot.
I understand.
And so their front yard is, or front yard setback would be off Branchwood, rear yard setback would be to the east, and then side yards are the north and the south. If these were individual lots that were being, and one unit on each lot, then they would have their own front, side, and rear yards, just like any other single-family plot. But this is being developed as one single lot, and so that one single lot, we have to assign a front, rear, side yard, just like any other parcel.
And I might just add that it's not atypical to have this issue of side to rear setback, even on single-family districts, because the side setbacks and the rear setbacks are different. So where we have a little bit more match and alignment of setback to on the east property line, you've got the rear 25 and the rear 25. We've got this issue with just one building there for a portion of the lot line that is 10 feet away from the lot line because it's a side yard. So it is a code compliant condition. When this happens, we look to elements to screen. So the fencing, the trees, the shrubs, those sorts of things. So, and I would agree with Dean, the placement of the driveway appears to be a function of the closeness of the shortness of the frontage along Branchwood Drive that's too close to the intersection. And we've got to keep the intersection clear for traffic and not have that conflict as far away from the intersection as possible.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kelly.
Probably a question for the applicant. When I drove out there, there's an outbuilding that's to the south of the current property, and I'm interested what the setback is from the property line to that white outbuilding currently.
I have no
Well,
I can answer
sir,
that also.
let me address that. So we have a process that we go through. We may ask you the same question. I asked the applicant first. We'll see if he can respond, and then we'll go through it. It's a way of managing our meetings. We don't intend it to be unfair. We may ask you some of the questions you want to tell us. Just hang on. We'll go through the process. For those of you who were here the last time, we went through the process. We asked people questions. So I'm going to start with the applicant if they know the distance.
I would like to say I don't, but I did, I mean, in the original package that I submitted, I provided some extra drawings of kind of demolition and that, to paint a picture of, hey, what all's going on. That building did show up on those drawings. Catherine may be able to answer. It's probably within 5 feet. It was right on the property line, but I can't, I mean, without having it with me right now, I can't say, you know, 7.25 feet, but it was on one of the, showed up on the drawings as an existing condition for the review set. Sorry,
Do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say our aerial images are usually off by maybe a foot, 2 to 3 feet, and that building does appear to rest very near the property line, and so that lines up with what Dean is telling you, that it's probably within 5 feet of that property line or less.
Thanks.
I was
Commissioner
just,
Sands.
yeah, I was just going to add by looking at, by looking at the city's interactive map on ArcGIS, it's almost on top of the property line, so. I had a quick question for applicant. One of the comments that was brought up was if they're going to be owner-occupied units. Are they going to be owner-occupied units, or are they going to be primarily rented to meeting a certain criteria?
They're going to be marketed as single, different titles, so you can buy one half of a duplex. I will probably maintain 1 or 2 as investment property. I may even live in there. I haven't decided yet, but I may decide to live there in one of the walkout basement units. But they are going to be individually titled.
Okay, so the primary intent is owner-occupied?
That's correct.
Okay.
And the other thing on the HOAs, I'm going to have a pretty tight HOA. I don't like cars and driveways at night, so that's why I did the bigger garages, so that will be part of it. There will be a little bit of guest parking, but I don't envision parking on the street or parking in the driveway at night.
Okay, thank you. So kind of a quick follow-up question for staff. When, so it is one property, it's platted as one property. Can you give us an example of somewhere else in the city where there may be a building that's titled for sale, but the buildings exist on the same property? Maybe it would give me a sense of what I can compare it to, and probably some of the folks out here. See, that's why she's got to come back. She's got to come back every single meeting. She knows everything.
It's actually more common than you might think.
Okay.
Through the Townhouse Act, which is an act that's exempt from our subdivision regulations, you can plat one lot and then individually sort of condo out the buildings and own those individually.
Okay.
It's pretty widespread throughout the community.
So,
Okay.
So it's not unique. It's quite possible that and in fact we don't regulate the ownership issue at all in our code.
Right, I know we
So,
don't. I know the city doesn't, but
yeah. The cottages at Deerfield.
cottages at Deerfield, what's the
Um,
roundabout neighborhood address for that? Because I'm not,
We just looked at one off Bob Billings and the villas. The villas at Alvamar.
oh, okay.
Um,
I know that area. You're not making this easier for you to leave, Sheila. My gosh.
Not one that I think of. I think the village of Almar, or at Clinton Lake, which is at the roundabout on Clinton Parkway before you get to the lake. Those to the north of there, to the right, are all
Okay.
that type
Yep.
of construction. where
I see.
it's- There may be several lots, but there's a townhome type ownership there.
So if no one else has a question, I have one more question for the
Sure.
applicant. Quick
Go ahead.
question for the applicant. Maybe Mr. Grobe can answer it. The designs seem to suggest, and maybe I'm just looking at them wrong, the concept design's a flat roof. Are they going to be flat roof? Or is there going to be a pitch roof, or?
From the street, it appears to be a flat roof, but it's about a 3/12 pitch, so it's hidden
Okay,
behind the facade, so it'll all run to the back. And the northwest corner, which wasn't talked about, is a retention
yeah,
pond,
saw
so
that.
all the drainage will go that way. It will not go to the neighbors.
Okay,
And that will have a fountain feature, and it's not a mosquito-infested place. It'll be part of the garden.
okay. Thank you for
All
indulging my
right.
multiple questions.
Further commissioner questions or discussion? Questions for staff? Motions? Commissioner Willie?
another question for staff. So we have before us the preliminary development plan. Did you mention that the final development plan will be administrative, or does that come back to us? Okay.
I meant to mention also when comparing code standards, The RM12 height requirement of 35 feet is the same as all the RS districts. So from that standpoint, it's going to be, the height is very compatible with the existing residential uses in the area. So, in other words, the property rights that go with the properties to the east and south to build up to 35 feet are the same right that this property would enjoy if rezoned to the RM12.
Commissioner Sands.
I have another question for staff. The homeowners association, that is kind of registered with the Register of Deeds? That's who maintains that generally?
It's a civil, well, it's recorded at the Register of Deeds,
Recorded with
but
the
it's managed by the HOA entity, yes.
Okay, so what, and maybe this is, I don't know, might be too low level of a detail to worry about, but what is the interaction when we have a situation like this where there's going to be a rezoning that may impact an HOA's rules? What is the process? Is there a process that the city manages, or does the HOA worry about that and then record with the Register of Deeds?
Well, they're two different legal instruments. So we enforce the city's codes and
Right.
regulations, and we would hope that they would comply with those. They can go greater than our codes.
That they can't eliminate?
And then they manage and enforce those from a civil standpoint.
Okay.
Commissioner Kelly?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Dreiling had some comments. I'd like to hear what he's got to say.
I would also.
Yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Dreiling, if there's further comment you'd care to make, as you said before?
I'm sorry, you calling my
Yes,
Would either.
either. Mr. Dreiling wanted to make a further comment. Okay.
So you have a direct question? I can't.
Well, I mean, there was some questions about the setback, and we gave the applicant the opportunity, and Mr. Dreiling said he'd like to respond to that, so here's your chance.
Okay, is this the one where you're talking about the shed, the distance on that one?
Tell me what you know about the setbacks. That's what I want to hear, what you got to say.
Of this property or of that shed?
Well, both.
I don't know what the city has zoned for setbacks on that property. Ours, the surrounding neighborhood, is 35 feet from the property line setback.
Right, do you know what
That
the,
was not in the city. The one just north was not in the city.
right,
And the developer of Ranchwood, they bought the property from him, so it's already, that shed was already there.
Okay.
There wasn't no setback line then.
right.
And as far as his 50-foot setback on 6th Street, go by the apartments just west of Folks Road and 6th Street. If that's 50 feet, my eyesight's wrong.
It's not.
It's not-
It's not 50 feet.
It's governed by a different set of rules, though.
Oh, you should. Don't say rules. Well, we want their rules.
I'd love KDOT.
Probably not.
Something's not right. They get by with, that's probably 35 feet from on 6th Street. It's not 50 feet. Move it, change the rules and move this one about 25 feet north. I'd be happy. Thank you.
Thank you again. Let's bring it back up here for further discussion, questions.
Yeah, just
Commissioner Culver.
clarification, that access restriction on 6th Street, so nothing could access there, and then really nothing along Branchwood there until you get to that southwest corner.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
We have to provide access to every property in the city.
Mhm.
We just try to provide it at the best place for the traffic system.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Kelly.
I have an item I'd like us to discuss a little bit, and let's start with the setback. The setback, I understand the neighbor's position because they're looking at it not from how the property sits on, how it sits on the land, right? So they would like, it sounds to me like the same 25 feet all the way around because it's how they see that property, right? But the developer has designed it within the code and is calling that the side, whatever it is, the side, right? So I'm interested whether we think we should follow our code, or where we should ask the developer to make some concessions on behalf of the neighbors that, even though they don't see it as the side, and it is clearly the back of a property because we condo those properties out, that has some other implications. I mean, it's the back of, I don't know which unit it is, it's that southern unit. We can all agree that that's not the side of it, we're looking at the back of it, but we're using the side setback to determine that setback. Am I making sense, everybody? I'm just interested in how we want to talk about that, what we think. Because I don't know what I think yet, so make up my mind for me.
I'll jump in. I would say something's got to be a side. And if the frontage is on Branchwood Court, we're restricted on the north because of KDOT and what their setbacks are required. The back then becomes either the Branchwood neighbors or the Fox Chase neighbors. So someone's got to be the side. I think Mr. Grobe, I mean, this is a better layout than the concept we saw previously. He's done everything in his power to minimize the footprint, but someone's got to still be that side. So I think in a general sense, what I'm saying is, because you've got the restrictions on the north end of the property, the movement inside on those access roads has to be of a certain width, thank you. You don't really have much of a choice to move anything around. And I'm not a architect or an engineer or anything, but it looks like it's where it's going to be. Remarks complete. I jumped in.
I just want to comment on how far we've come from the last time we looked at this, and that we don't lose track of that. We were looking 2 months ago, at an RMO district, which would allow for a 45-foot height building design. We're now looking at RM12, which would allow 35 feet, except that we've asked for and received this planned development overlay, which makes them tell us what they're planning to build. And now we're looking at single story, and it's limited to single story. So let's not forget just how much we've gained so far from the kinds of comments and troubles we were having with the first issue. So this is a much better plan than what we had before, and that's for starters. I do think that the road access is not going to be terribly negotiable, because we are required to allow access to this property, and that seems to be the only place allowed by all of the other restrictions to it. I also think that because this falls within our code and the setback requirements, that we cannot demand a further setback on that south side. I think there may be room, however, to pleasantly ask if there is some room for, I don't think 25 feet is probably going to happen, but if there's any way for the developer to offer something more of a setback for that building. The road, I think, is probably not terribly negotiable. But could either Mr. Grobe or Mr. Wilson address that at all? How set in stone are those building footprints on this south building?
Well, we kind of took it back to the drawing board after the last time. We've eliminated one building. The clubhouse was going to be a two-story, because we heard the neighbors didn't like 2 stories. We might be able to look at the center area. Our issues are, and I'm going to pass it to Dean, is if there is a fire, we need to have a fire truck come there. So we've got arches with our driveway that we or the main road that we have to abide by. So we might be able to, if we could shrink that center area at all and move the buildings a couple feet over, I'll certainly try. I'm not an engineer, and we'll have Paul Warner and his crew, along with Dean, try to do something like that. But we did everything we could to get it to where we are today. within the guidelines for fire issues.
Commissioners, if I may, I think the issue is for that one building shown on along the south property line, which is at a 10-foot setback. If it were a 15-foot setback, it would simply be a design issue of the duplex unit, or the structure itself. So it may be a little bit smaller building. So that, I think, is what the question is there room on that one building to get 15 feet or more versus the 10 feet? Is that the issue? So that's the question, sir.
To clarify, that would be a change in the shape of the building.
Or size of the
Size,
building,
something
or,
like that, of the building
or
itself.
if there's room to move it up 5 feet to the north.
So you're talking about that one building?
Just that one
Yeah,
building, correct?
Well, it cost me another design plan. Another 10 grand or whatever to redesign because I've already got 2 designs going in there. I'll strong arm Paul and see what we can do to capture another couple feet.
Thank you. Commissioner Carpenter.
Now that you sat down. Comments for me when Mr. Grove talked about not putting up fencing because it already existed, and we heard from a neighbor that there's an absence of fencing on the east side. Would you be able to put in fencing on the east side
I would.
where it's not present now?
I haven't walked the fence line. My thought was it was all wood, 6 feet wood, and I was intending on the north side and the west side to put a wrought iron style fence so you can see it from the street. But if there's some damaged fence on the south or the west side, I would think it would make more sense to repair it in the same type of fence they have.
Or fill in gaps?
Or fill in their gaps. I would do that.
Great.
Want me up here? Okay.
Anybody else got a
Down so
question?
somebody else can.
While he's up there? Okay. Thank you. Any further commission questions? Commissioner Willie?
Further comment.
Okay.
I inherited this, I haven't been on here very long, but the process of how we look at infill development or new land development is we really try and have transitional zones between single-family residential and, say, a large road like 6th Street. And you'll see to the west, if we were to pull that up again, a much more dense development just to the west along 6th Street. So I think our instinct is always that a property in that kind of location with single family to the east and the south, and actually even the single family that's to the east, I think is fairly rare that would come all the way up to a busy street like 6th Street. Usually we look at some more transitional density for that area. So if a project had come forward to say strictly RM12, 12 units per acre, which was quite a lot more than what we're looking at here, I think it would be about 28 units on that lot. We're looking instead at 12, what they've offered. We would be tempted to look at something like that because it fits our idea of this transitional zoning. What's come forward with these 12 units on this lot is really quite good. So I think we need to also look at how much the applicant is giving to the neighborhood structure and the neighborhood character in putting in some townhomes that are going to be nicely priced and well-built and not terribly dense in that area. So just
Thank
throwing
you.
that out there.
Commissioner Sands?
Just a quick procedural question. So do we need to ask the applicant via the motion to make that a condition of the motion to get that 5 feet? Or can we just see if the applicant can work to get 5 feet?
I would prefer that you make it a condition of your preliminary development plan approval in some sort of language that says to mitigate the impact of the side yard to rear yard nature of the project to the properties to the south. The setback on the south property line would be 15 feet. instead of the code required 10 feet.
Well, I'll say that I'm in favor of this project. I think the applicant, from our meeting in November, which was viewed and reviewed for its learning purposes, I think the applicant has brought forward a project that alleviated concerns that were brought up at the time from the neighbors. I'd be happy to have this in my neighborhood, and so I'm comfortable making a motion to rezone approximately 2.5 acres from Urban Reserve District to RM12 PD with plan development overlay located at 5275 West 6th Street, and forward it to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact found in the body of the staff report.
Thank you. Commissioner Sands, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Payton, thank you.
I have a question.
Is there further discussion? Commissioner Willing?
And did that include the 15-foot setback?
So I was going to save that for 3B.
Got it.
I just want to make one comment about it. I think what's been identified here is one of the quirks in the development code, when a side yard isn't really a side yard. I mean, it is under the code definition, but this is an example of, we can have infill developments that our code doesn't actually fit reality. I mean, we've got backs of two buildings facing each other, but we don't have a rear setback, just because of the orientation of a single parcel. So that's kind of going to stay in the back of my head after we get through, look at the new comp plan amendments and how that has to change or tweak our development code, is something that we might want to have a little more flexibility when we're talking about infill developments, because the city's on a trend to be pushing for infill. So I think we have an obligation to make sure we don't have a situation that could be worse than this. I think this is, although it's not ideal, it's not the worst that we could see because of what could have been placed on this under our code. I mean, this is a low-density development for what is actually permitted in what's been requested tonight. So I'm going to vote in favor of it, but I'd like everyone to keep that in mind, that as we start talking about infill developments down the road here, we're going to have to, let's look for some of these quirks that are coming up.
I appreciate Commissioner Carpenter's forward-thinking comments about these issues, orientation, and the issue of infill development in the future. I will agree with Commissioner Willie. I think this project is way better than what we could have had under our RMO proposal earlier. I appreciate the developers and the applicants' flexibility and willing to take the opportunity with this overlay seriously and come back with a significantly better project. The height of the buildings, the density. We are restricted with this entrance, unfortunately, by KDOT restrictions, but that is the way it is. And we must provide access to every property in the city, as Director McCulloch has said. That said, I will support this application. Commissioner Kelly.
A couple of comments. I would be supportive of Commissioner Carpenter's looking at plan development overlays and which way the items face on the parcel. I want to thank the applicant for coming back. That's a significant cost, and I hope our neighbors understand that. He had to redesign the entire deal, and now we're asking him to do it yet a third time to meet a code that he already meets. And just by listening to the neighbors, that developer is working hard. This is why sometimes we hear in Lawrence from developers that it's hard to develop in Lawrence. All right, this is one of the reasons why, but this gentleman has come back again and again, gone through the whole process again. I think that fences is a good example. You know, the neighbors are perfectly able to build their own fence on their side of the property line, but he volunteered to say, hey, maybe I can build the fence. I mean, Lawrence must be a pretty cool place to live and a pretty cool place to develop too. So that's why the process works the way it does, is so that we can understand what each other are trying to get to. And I'm pleased that we use our plan development overlay. I'm pleased that the commission sort of walked through that setback issue, because it sounds like we might be able to make some changes to our code, which would make our meetings shorter, which I'm always for when the weather is looming. So I'm going to support the motion.
Any further discussion? Well, and thank you, Commissioner Kelly, for kicking off that setback discussion as well. Seeing no further discussion, we have a motion on the table to approve. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes 9-0. On to item 3B. Crispy strips.
So I don't think we're going to see another presentation on item 3B. Since I made the first motion, I do want to thank the neighbors for coming out. I know this may not be moving the way you had thought or intended or wanted. Hopefully you still, though, see value in the process that we're using and the input that you brought to us. We still try to consider within limitations to try to find the best fit for everybody. Thank the staff for doing a great job, as always. And with that, I'd like to make a motion to approve the preliminary development plan based upon the findings of fact and forward to the City Commission for approval, subject to the following conditions numbered 1 through 4, and adding condition 5 for the developer to find 5 feet in that southern property line boundary. Increase the setback from that southern property building to 15 feet.
Is that language suitable?
Yeah, I'm working on trying to get a little bit more purpose for these conditions when they move from the code. So if you could add something to the effect to mitigate setback conflicts with the properties to the south, that would be my recommendation.
Oh, man.
And just too often we see projects done 30 years ago with no specific purpose. We're trying to guess and assume what they are, but we see there's an obvious note on the site plan or plat that was probably in a meeting just like this, created, but so we're trying to just work on that.
So if I may amend condition 5 to ask the developer to increase the setback on the southern building from the property line by 15 feet in order to mitigate concerns from existing neighbors.
Increasing it to 15 feet.
What did I say?
By.
Yeah. 2. Yeah. To 15 feet. Thank you. Amendment number 3 to condition 5 to item 3B.
All right, we got you. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Sands. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Sinclair. Any further commission discussion?
I have a comment. So I'm all in favor of looking at how this loophole exists and why it does in terms of how a backyard becomes a side yard, and I think perhaps that's something that ought to be looked at with some scrutiny. However, I have a hard time moving the ground underneath the feet of people who have already made plans based on the code that exists, even with having a good reason for doing so. I'm very in favor of asking the developer if he would consider making a change in order to be a good neighbor. I have a harder time requiring it in order to approve the final development or the preliminary development plan. So that's my comment.
I believe Commissioner Sands' motion was worded in the form of a request.
I can do an amendment 4, but that's going to kill everybody.
I think you've already made a request, not a demand.
Well, Commissioner, I urge you to be very clear on this issue going forward. It's going to direct us in how we do the final development plan. It's going to direct the applicant in the expenditures of money. I mean, essentially, you have 3 options, right? You have the option to approve the development plan as presented to you tonight, which we're saying is a code-compliant plan, and we can save the debate of setbacks. Commissioner Willie calls it a loophole. I call it a by design standard because we can debate that at the right time and place. But so you can approve it as submitted. You can require it. It always helps to have voluntary compliance, so you may want to have the applicant back up to ask if, I heard sort of that he would be willing to consider that. Or if you're not comfortable with the design as laid out with the setbacks in conflict, as you see it, in conflict with the neighbors to the south, then you could deny the development plan and send the applicant back to the drawing board. So those are your three options on the preliminary development plan.
Commissioner Willie.
I would like to hear from either Mr. Wilson or Mr. Grobe on how you feel that this would affect the plan to find another 5 feet worth of setback on that south building.
Oh, this is, I guess, a tough one. If you look at the development plan from north to south, kind of started with the building, driveways adjacent to the house, the circle drive, and then the parking that we added kind of on the northeast corner, and then the next building, which is about 5 feet away. And then as we move south, and again, I don't know if we can back up to one of the plans. So you could just say, hey, go down there. That you'll see as you move south, you know, it kind of came down to having the room with the driveways and that's where we ended up. Again, I bumped it from the required 5-foot setback to 10, just because as it worked out, hey, give them some extra room without, you know, thinking for that purpose. Can it be done? Sure, we can. I can squeeze something in there. You know, if you move it, then kind of one building set can sit in front of another one, versus if you kind of line up the fronts of the building kind of in the south and the east side. Can it be done? You know, I guess I would ask that, you know, if you want to restrict it to 10 feet, because we could move it from the preliminary development plan to 5 feet if you approve it as it is, that, you know, not that I would, but I'm just saying that, you know, if you want to, you know, to assure that, hey, 10 feet, I understand there's going to be some residents right behind that, but also the fact that we don't have, that's the only building on the south side that we're not lined up with 3 buildings, you know, along that south side, that no matter how you look to the north from those residents behind us, that, you know, all you see is a big building. You know, one story, you know, it's not much sticking up. And I don't want to belittle the neighbors' concerns, because, you know, everybody, you know, looks at it a little bit differently. But, you know, can you force it on us? I would say, I mean, you have that right, but ask that you don't. And I guess the one thing would make sure that that setback doesn't affect the driveway, because we really have no choice, you know, with a setback that then says, hey, you can't have the driveway come up through the side yard setback or something. I'd have to look at that as far as the setback, but, you know, that would kill us, because we can't move the driveway anyplace. So, you know, anything can be done. I guess thought it was, we made a good gesture to move it farther away, but I guess that's in your court. But again, I think you look at that and see that the amount that the space in the middle taken up is probably a fourth of the entire south property line. So it's not overbearing, but again, that's in the eye of the beholder. So I danced around that pretty good, didn't I? Sorry.
Thank you. I would also like to hear from some of the neighbors on the south side. How much does this 5 feet mean to you? It's a 10-foot off the property line now. We're talking about 15 feet. It's not a very large difference, but I'd like to hear from you about that.
I believe our residence is most directly affected by this building. Where it is located, if it's 5 feet further away, it will still be at a slightly higher elevation than the ground floor of our residence. Unless there is a considerable amount of shrubbery and screening, the windows on the south elevation of that building will look directly into our family room, kitchen, dining room, and we in turn will be looking directly into their building. So we're going to, 5 feet would help, but we are going to need really good screening there to block the view. The other thing I didn't get to mention earlier is along the property line, there are, I believe, 4 mature trees. They are half on our property, half on the developer's property, and at some point, those trees are going to fall over. If they build that building, those trees are going to hit it. So they have to come down. And either we have to negotiate half and half somehow to get rid of them, or at least put them on the schedule to get rid of them when they go to building. I know this doesn't affect the zoning part of it, but that is one of my concerns. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. It feels like I'm the one dragging this out. I apologize.
No.
It sounds as though maybe a screening issue may be more helpful than the extra 5 feet, which might be something that they could.
If you do that, I'm sorry, if you don't have additional setback, you won't have room to put large enough trees in there to actually screen the property. And on our side, we have an easement for electrical power, so we can't plant trees inside our fence line. So we're kind of stuck with that. And I can accept the fact that the building has to go somewhere. And if there's a way to reduce the visibility with the windows somehow, I would love to see it. But that's a detail that'll have to be worked on later.
Thank you. I'm done.
Okay. Commissioner Payton.
I am inclined to not require the additional 5-foot setback.
I feel the same way. Commissioner Sands, would you consider re-amending your?
Yes, and this time I wrote it down.
Withdrawing your other motion?
Well, so since we're talking about, it, do we want a motion to request the applicant to find 5 feet, or do we just want to strike that from the motion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we've got a
Commissioner
plan
Weaver.
that meets the code, and
Yep.
for us to then turn around to the developer and say, we want you to exceed the code in this instance, I don't think it's fair to the developer to do that. And it'd be my preference just to leave it out altogether, leave the conditions that are in the original staff recommendation.
Thank you.
I'm fine with that. So, Mr. Chair, if it pleases you, I'd like to change my motion yet again.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of a preliminary development plan for a multifamily residential development located at 5275 West 6th Street and forwarded to the City Commission for approval based on the findings of fact found in the staff report and the conditions 1 through 4, subject to the conditions 1 through 4 found by the staff report.
Thank you. We have another motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Weaver, thank you. Any further commission comment or discussion? Commissioner Kelly.
I'm going to vote for this because I just want this on the record. I'm going to vote for it because it does meet the code. And our responsibility is towards land use and looking at land use and how that is. We're not done, we're just sending it to the City Commission. So the neighbors will have another opportunity to voice their concerns. But I think when we look at our code, I would agree with Commissioner Weaver. If that's the code and the developer's developing to the code, then it's a little tricky to pull the rug out from under them and say, each neighbor that comes in and has one more thing that they want, we need to do. So I do want the neighbors to recognize, as Commissioner Willie nicely said earlier, the progress that's been made so far. You know, we're getting to look at actually a design here. We're getting to have discussions about it, and there will be an opportunity for neighbors to comment on the final development plan. So I will vote in favor because it meets the code.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. Any further commission discussion before we vote? Seeing none, all those in favor of recommending approval, please raise your hand. Passes 9-0. Thank you. Thank you all. All right. Let us return now to our regularly scheduled agenda with item 1. A rezoning on Research Park Drive.
Just a moment. Here we go. Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day, Planning Office. This item is for rezoning of one property located within the Oriad West Industrial Business Park. The property is currently zoned IBP. The applicant is proposing to rezone this property to IBP plus one additional use. The specific intent of the application is to allow for a self-storage facility, which is not currently allowed in the IBP district. It is, however, allowed in the IL district. The property that surrounds this subject property is IBP zone to the east and to the west and to the south. The property to the north was rezoned fairly recently to IL with a set of restrictions and conditions. This particular application follows in the footsteps of that property to the north to do the same thing with even more use restrictions and only allowing the one specific use. To orient you, the property is located as part of the West Lawrence neighborhood. It's one of the largest neighborhoods in the city. It's part of the Oriad West Business Park. As we've highlighted, we've looked at a number of different applications in this particular area very recently. And then the third picture on the far right highlights what the uses are today in this section of that business park. The star represents the subject property, the property to the north that was zoned IL. For the Rainbow International, I believe is the name of the business. They are actually fall under a use category that falls into the commercial group. As I've mentioned, the reason for this request is for a specific development related to climate-controlled units. The applicant has provided a concept plan that's included in your application. There are a number of details that would be coming forward with that application through the site planning process, which I believe they've actually submitted as well. There are a number of specific uses that are proposed to be restricted out of this property if approved. This is a list of those, and they're in a couple different forms in your staff report. It is more restrictive than the IL zoning to the north. The project, if approved, does retain this property in the industrial inventory, and that is a significant concern for staff. The property has been zoned as part of the business park basically since '83. It was included in a number of different preliminary plats in, sorry, that should be 19 instead of 1898. As we talk about in the staff report a little bit, some of the detrimental effects certainly are very limiting of this property for the IL district. That is something that is being self-selected by the applicant. The benefit is that it does remain in that industrial inventory. Staff's recommendation is for approval. We did not add or change any conditions above and beyond what the applicant is proposing for this request. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sandy. Is the applicant or a representative here tonight?
Sure.
All right.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Brian Sturm. I'm a landscape architect with Land Plan Engineering, and I am present tonight on behalf of the property owner of record, which is Wakarusa Plaza LC. This is a bit of a unique zoning request. It's certainly a unique project. Last summer, Land Plan was approached by a company here in Lawrence. It's been around for many years, Professional Moving and Storage, the owner of which, Bobby Jones, is here tonight. If there are questions, they've been looking to do something unique in Lawrence for a while, and they've been searching for the right piece of land. Professional Moving Storage is both a moving company as well as a storage facility. Their locations at 23rd and Franklin. They wanted to be able to find a new location to serve a clientele of theirs, which is increasingly more and more found in West Lawrence. And what they wanted to provide was not the sort of self-storage facility we're accustomed to seeing in Lawrence, long, low buildings with many garage doors. You pull up, you get out, you open up a garage door, and you shuffle your wares in and out. They wanted to provide a climate-controlled, self-contained, storage building. We're talking about a building of multiple stories. You walk in, you cart your goods in using hand trucks or dollies, or the staff would take it in. And the units are, as I said, climate controlled. They're generally a little bit smaller. This is something they've wanted to do for a number of years as they found more and more folks on, say, the central and western parts of town using their services, say, while they're renovating their home or making an in-town move. Or moving loved ones to and from, say, the university or back and forth within Lawrence. As you all probably know, protectors of our code and our comp plan, industrial zone land in West Lawrence is not super common. But what we do have, that you've obviously seen requests about here over the last few years, is the IBP district here in the Oriad West Research and Office Park. And so that's where they've chosen to make their attempt to do this project. So I'm just going to, for all you commissioners keeping score up there, I'm just going to run through the golden factors and how this project, meets those. Conformance with the comp plan, we're good. Comp plan calls for industrial property here. Comp plan also calls for us to preserve the industrial employment-related property that we have in our city, and this certainly aims to do that. We look at the character of the neighborhood. The West Lawrence neighborhood is more eclectic than sometimes folks give it credit for being. It is largely single family, but this pocket that's been zoned IBP for so long, it's got a mix of different uses. I mean, you have contractors' shops there between Castle Plumbing and Rainbow International. You have doctors and dentists and physical therapists who have their offices there. You have family-oriented uses between Lawrence Gymnastics Academy, Lawrence Dance Academy, Lawrence Montessori School, and you do have slightly more technical and office-oriented uses as well between, say, Microtech or the Golf Courses Superintendents of America. One thing that's a constant, those are all pretty attractive buildings. And this project will be no different. Our architect actually is here tonight if there were questions about that, Stan Hernley. We will aim to certainly meet the city's industrial design guidelines as the city moves through that as part of the site plan. There's actually an architectural control committee that by covenant will take a look at this building as well, just sort of on behalf of the Oriad West neighborhood. And above all, I think this is a use that's going to serve the neighborhood. They're locating there in an effort to serve more of the folks who live on that side of town. Zoning and uses nearby, we've talked a little bit about that. Sandy mentioned that, and I think it's important to note that it's surrounded by IBP as well as IL already to the north. Suitability of the property for the uses to which it is restricted. One thing I tried to do with my zoning request was generally tailor a zoning district that preserved all of those IBP uses. While it's IL, we've kept all the IBP uses that would typically be found in this neighborhood. Detrimental effects to those around. I don't see any. And a big part of that is, again, the way we've conditioned the IL zoning request. This isn't going to be a property where you're going to see other uses found in limited industrial parts of town. There won't be gas station here. You won't be able to do a fast food restaurant here. You won't be able to do, a tractor dealership here. Gain to the public health welfare over denial of the project versus hardship to the owner. No one benefits when we keep our business park vacant. We're looking to bring forward an attractive development here, and one that will increase the activity within that park and benefit the surrounding neighborhood. Length of time this property's been vacant, unless you count the drag strip out there, which still sits on that property but isn't used, it has been vacant since industrial or business park zoning was brought forth. And lastly, we have a positive recommendation from staff. So I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have as you deliberate. Just let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Sturm. Are there any members of the public who would care to comment on this? Please, sir.
My name's Taraz Birdie, and my wife and I, we own Lawrence Montessori School across the street. When we decided to build a school over there, we looked at what the zonation is and got an idea of what IBB means, and our understanding was that it would basically be buildings like the golf course, superintendent buildings and other offices and so forth. And clearly, if this type of use was not allowed there, then it is not. It is, in a way, devaluing the neighborhood in some sense. I mean, that's just a logical conclusion to come to. It's more appropriate for industrial areas. I just want to be clear, we don't want to deprive anyone of the opportunity to run a business, but we want to make sure that if this use takes place over there and construction goes ahead, then the architectural and the aesthetic appeal of that area is not compromised in any way. And that's not really very difficult to do. We know what the costs are, and in the larger scheme of things, it's not that big a deal. So that's kind of where we stand. I was given a plan of the building and have some notes to suggest as to how we can make sure that the aesthetics is maintained, and like Brian said, it's in character with what the buildings are like. Do we have a plan that we can perhaps put up, and I can maybe make some comments?
Well,
we just don't want it to look like an industrial facility,
I understand.
basically.
I
And
understand.
that's, you're depriving us of some value, and I don't know what legal means you have for changing the use, but it has an implication, and we just want to make sure that it doesn't negatively affect our investment.
I understand.
If I may have an opportunity to submit my suggestions, could I do so in writing?
You could do that in writing. What opportunity would you have to make further written requests?
I believe that the applicant has submitted the site plan recently. This project would be subject to the community design guidelines. There are specific industrial design guidelines that would be applicable to the project. As the project planner, that communication would come through me. And then I would also work with the applicant to try and make sure that the project is compliant with city code as well as compliant with the industrial design guidelines. When we get comments from the public that are over and above those kinds of things, we do try to work to get a negotiated agreement between all parties as we move forward through the project. The site plan process is administrative. There should be notice to properties within 400 feet through the site plan process. And then through that process, there is also an appeal, so that if any party in that process feels aggrieved, either the applicant or property owners or even neighborhood, they can make an appeal, and there's a process to that, and at which point that site plan then would go to the city commission to be considered.
So there will be opportunity for public input.
Okay.
All right.
All right, yeah. Our main concern is just there be trees and it be hidden, essentially. And so are you saying that some suggestions that we have would be discussed during that period? Is that right? I see. And so today, your goal is to do what? To approve the rezoning or?
That's right.
To
That's right.
rezone the property.
To rezone the property.
It's really a two-step process, and then it would be site planned, and that sounds like that's in process, and the applicant and architect is here to more than likely contact you and learn what your issues are with it. Our expectation is that they would meet with you outside of meeting with us and have a discussion with you about what they can implement into their project. One of the reasons we were comfortable with this and not pushing for a PD overlay, if you will, is because we do have our industrial design guidelines, which puts architectural elements into play in a location like this, which is highly visible and has a context surrounding it. So we do have regulations that to apply here that we don't have in a multi-dwelling project.
And it should be pointed out that those industrial guidelines, design guidelines, are the same for IBP or IL.
Correct. It's based on use, and this
Exactly.
isn't considered industrial use in the.
So this rezoning would not change those design guidelines or relieve the applicant of any adherence to them. And I believe the applicant has indicated their attention to the surrounding architecture already.
Well, I do understand that. It appears to me from what you're saying is that the input of the public and the property owners does not have any bearing on your process of rezoning or decision-making. It seems to me that way, because let's say if I were to say that I want to negotiate and make sure that to minimize the impact of a use that is not as appropriate as it was originally intended, then I cannot negotiate and make sure that that's offset by perhaps ensuring what we would like the building to look like or what the property should look like. And I just have a question that what legal authority do you have to go and rezone something when initially it was not meant to be there?
I will take her question under advisement, and we can discuss that in a moment. But for now, I'll just leave you with the fact that we do have a process in place for changing zoning at the request of an applicant, and that is where our legal authority comes from, the process that we have in place to do that. And we take all those considerations, all those factors into consideration, the design, the suitability, the golden factors, as we call them, and that's what you're hearing tonight, is how does this suit the current development that's there? Is it appropriate? And so that's the process you're seeing right now. And that process will continue. As Scott said, it's a two-step process, and there will be further input at a later time.
Okay, I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back up here for comments or discussion. Questions for applicant or staff?
Did you want to give the applicant a
Oh,
chance?
I'm sorry, you're right. Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Mr. Stern, would you care to respond to the comments you just heard?
I'll just echo the words of your professional staff that we, look forward to engaging in review of, the site characteristics, landscape architecture even, as well as the architecture of this building to make sure that we conform to the city's expectations.
Thank you. All right. Now we'll bring it back up to the commission. Commissioner Culver.
Point of clarification for staff, looking at the use tables in the IL district there, it was strucken through any uses that were permitted in IL but not permitted in the industrial business park. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the only thing that would be additional in this request would be the storage use.
Yes.
Is that correct?
We've held all of the IBP
Mm-hmm.
uses that are allowed in IL and added and struck all the ones that aren't allowed in IBP and added the storage.
So it's just essentially adding that one use of storage.
Yes.
Other than that, it would be IBP.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
What we call conditional zoning in our toolbox.
That's why Jim's got to look. I have a question for
Commissioner
staff.
Sands.
Would it simply not be easier to just add a special use permit or something to IBP?
The
Was that-
alternative would be to do a text amendment and add the use to the IBP district.
Changing all IBP forever and ever, amen.
Giving the property zoned IBP the ability to do that by right with a site plan versus go through the rezoning.
Okay.
Commissioner Culver.
And knowing that's our alternative, conditional zoning in this regard appears to make sense to me.
I'd ask the question, why this type of use was excluded from IBP when that category was created?
I don't know that it was a deliberate exclusion. It has to do with how the districts transferred between the old code and the new code. I did not go back and assess whether or not that use would have been allowed when it was zoned M1 or M1A prior to 2006. So it had to do with that change, not a deliberate exclude this use.
And I would say that, not too long ago, we did a pretty extensive, when we built the IM district, we did a pretty exhaustive analysis of all of our districts, looking for the distinctions between them, the similarities. Some of you may recall some of that effort. I don't think it's a use that, if permitted to be the more conventional type of mini warehouse use, may fit in a industrial business park the way IBP is set up. As we talked to this applicant about what their project was and what their goals were at this specific location, we encourage them to go for this conditional zoning versus a text amendment to allow it throughout IBP. So I don't think widespread it showed up as a use that should be allowed throughout all of IBP. What we're recommending is that at this particular location with this particular use, knowing what we're going to get as a project, that it makes sense, it's compatible.
Thank you. Commissioner Willie.
I don't have a problem with this use on this location. I think it's a reasonable fit. I'm glad for it to stay industrial in one way or another. I would hate to be losing any more industrially zoned property, because who knows what needs to go in there after this project has fulfilled its lifespan. The question is just how to accomplish it. Text amendments take a really long time from up here. Conditional zoning doesn't bother me as much as it does Commissioner Carpenter. So I would be in favor of it.
Commissioner Sinclair.
Being a relatively new commissioner, can I ask Commissioner Carpenter what?
Oh boy, you did it, didn't you? Oh, God.
The operative word was unique. We heard that word over and over and over again. We're changing our zoning code for one use, for one person. And that I find a bit problematic. I mean, as a commission, we kind of waver back and forth across that line, whether we're willing to change codes or plans for one particular applicant, or we want to do something that's applicable citywide where everybody's situated in the same position. Here we're asked to change the zoning category to add one permitted use, just one, and strike out everything else that's allowed in that zoning category. Now, I don't know what's coming down the pike, but it seems to be a fine term of art between conditional zoning and spot zoning. Which is it? And as of right now, we have no Kansas law to guide us as to whether this is spot zoning or not. Communities are calling it conditional zoning to get around that prohibition of spot zoning, but it's not been challenged yet. So I don't know what we're getting into here and what we're setting up for down the road. So I have a problem with doing this because of that. Because look at the pattern. We're striking out every retail use because we're asked to change this to a zoning category. It has all kinds of retail possibilities, but we're asked to prohibit those in this one. I have absolutely no problem with what I'm hearing here for this particular use, for this internal structure that's going to fit the other building. It's going to blend in. It's going to be like the old style storage places that you'd find in older cities that you don't know the difference between an office building and a storage building because the exteriors look the same. That's what I'm hearing. I don't have a problem with that. It's just our process that it verges on. I'm having a hard time calling it conditional zoning when I'm fairly convinced it's really spot zoning, which is prohibited. So I have a problem with doing these.
Thank you. Commissioner Sinclair.
Well, I appreciate Commissioner Carpenter saying that because my reaction is similar to Commissioner Willie's, which is, do we then change the code, the entire code, because of this one use? My initial reaction was that maybe that was a lesser desired avenue to achieve this than doing something that's kind of restricted. But so I appreciate you explaining that. That makes sense.
I'm going to add a text amendment to change the code, which would allow, from what our planning director has said, would allow the outdoor separate storage units driving in and stuff is not desirable. So, I don't want to do that either. So, This is a tough one for me.
Commissioner Willie.
I'll make the motion.
All right.
And Commissioner Carpenter can vote against it. I would like to make a motion to rezone approximately 1.685 acres from IBP to IL district located on 1300 block of Research Park Drive. And how do we phrase this? Help me. As requested by the applicant.
We have a motion for Commissioner Willie to approve. A second. Commissioner Colbert, thank you. Any further commission discussion, comment? Seeing none. All those in favor of, excuse me, all those in favor of approval, please raise your hand. All those opposed? 7-2, the motion passes. Thank you. I beg your pardon?
Sorry, there was a second no.
Commissioner
Yes.
Payton.
On to item 2A, rezoning 1105 East 23rd Street. Need a break? All right.
I'd like to
Before we get going on that, let's have a 10-minute recess. Come back at 8:40.
Thank you.
Let us reconvene.
Super tall.
Let us resume with item 2A. A rezone request on East 23rd Street. Mary?
Good evening, I'm Mary Miller, current planner, and this item will have two parts. There'll be a rezoning request and a preliminary plat. It's for property at 1105 West or East 25th Street. This is the subject property. Only part of this will be rezoned. It'll be the southern portion. It's the former Kaw Valley Industrial Site. As you can see, the north part is developed. The south part has just been used for incidental uses. The property has split zoning. Most of this area is zoned CS, commercial strip. There is some RS10 zoning, and RS10 was the placeholder zoning back in the day when this was annexed back in the 1960s. We didn't have the UR district. So when you annexed a property and you didn't have a development proposal, you annexed it and zoned it RS1, I'm sorry. That converted to RS10 when we adopted our development code. So this is a placeholder zoning. The RS10 wasn't an intentional zoning district. It wasn't, they didn't review it and say this is adequate or appropriate for residential zoning. It was just a placeholder at the time. So with the transfer of ownership, the new property owner is platting and rezoning, preparing to redevelop the property. So we'll be looking at the golden factors, the criteria we look at to review zoning applications. One thing we look at is what is the zoning in the area. And from this, you can see most of it is commercial strip. We have commercial strip along the 23rd Street corridor, and it extends southward right in the subject property area. There is residential zoning to the southwest, which is adjacent to the subject property. Rezoning the southern portion of this lot would provide an even border to the CS zoning. It would be consistent with the rest of the zoning district, but we would need to take consideration of the residential properties to the southwest when we're site planning to ensure that we don't negatively impact those properties. This is a land use in the area. The yellow areas are the residential. They're further away from 23rd Street, and they don't include the little pocket that extends further to the south. The red labeled uses are commercial uses. We have a variety of them. Most of them are vehicle related. We have heavy equipment sales. We have auto repair, car wash, auto sales. We also have some construction sales or contractor yards. We have heating and air conditioning repairmen. We have a tow lot. We have a landscaping company. We have a fast order food. And then we have some office uses. So it's a very mixed use area with commercial being predominant along 23rd Street and residential being more predominant to the south. The proposed use is just a redevelopment, and they don't have a particular use in mind, but it would be a use that's allowed in the CS district. That would be compatible with the zoning and land use in the area. When we look at the character of the neighborhood, I looked at the same area that I looked at for the overall. And rezoning and redeveloping this would still be in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. Other things we look at is what is the compliance or the conformance with the comprehensive plan and with the adopted area plan. There isn't an adopted area plan for this area, so we look at Horizon 2020. It has one recommendation, particularly about East 23rd Street, and that is that redevelopment and infill opportunities are available and are emphasized along the older commercial segment east of the Santa Fe Railroad, which is now the Burroughs Creek Trail, which is just to the west of this property. It also encourages the retention, redevelopment, and expansion of established commercial areas of the community. And that this would fit that. We would be squaring off the commercial district and including a commercial use in that area as an infill opportunity. Another criteria we look at is, would the rezoning have a detrimental effect on nearby properties? And as I mentioned before, we do have residential uses down in the southwest corner. We have townhouses at the very bottom, and we have a single-family home more to the southwest. And when this develops, there could be negative impacts. When you have a commercial development, you could have light. We have exterior lighting. The way the buildings are oriented, the type of outdoor activity you have, is there outdoor storage? these kind of things could have a negative impact, and we would need to look at them when we site plan. And the applicant provided this concept plan, which shows the buildings being oriented, this building away from the residences. The parking area is being kept away and is separated by the building. Between the building and the residences would be a detention pond. This would also be a landscaped buffer yard. We require a landscape buffer yard between commercial and residential districts. So the development code has these kind of standards built in to help us mitigate the impact when you have a more intense zoning district right next to residential. And the development code also contains provisions that allow the planning director to impose conditions on a site plan when you have a more intense use within 500 feet of a residential use. And so we would be looking at that with the site plan, and he could impose additional conditions if necessary. So with these provisions in the development code, the proposed use is not expected to have a negative impact on nearby properties. Other factors we look at is what is the suitability of the property to the uses to which it is restricted. And this is surrounded on all sides, except for the very southwest side, by commercial and industrial uses. This would not be a very appropriate location for us to put the uses that are allowed in the RS10 district. That district allows detached homes, it allows churches, and it allows extended care facilities. And there's a few other uses that would be allowed with a special use permit. But this is not an area that we would recommend locating those type of uses, just due to the proximity of the commercial and industrial and the fact that it borders it on three sides. The length, the time the subject property has been vacant as zoned, it was annexed in 1960. The zoning for the northern portion went into effect in 1967, and it has not been developed since that time. And then we compare the effects of the denial or the approval of the rezoning. What would be the benefit to the public health, safety, and welfare? With the proper mitigation of any negative impacts, there would be no benefit by keeping the property undeveloped. The impact on the property owner would be that it would not be likely to ever develop as with uses that are permitted in the RS10 district. And so staff recommends forwarding this rezoning request to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings that are listed in the staff report. And do you want me to go right ahead with the preliminary plat?
Why don't we? Yes.
Okay. The preliminary plat proposes dividing this property into two lots. The north lot would be the one that's developed, and the southern lot would be the undeveloped portion. This shows the block area. The colored areas are already platted. So there's a few properties in this block that are not platted, and it is necessary to plat before you can get a building permit and develop. So this is one of the early steps in development. The preliminary plat is shown on the west side. They will be dedicating additional right-of-way for 23rd Street, as well as right-of-way for 24th Street. There are some existing easements. These are shown in the oranger color, and the yellow are new utility easements that would be dedicated with the plat. And staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat. And the applicant is present if you have questions for him, and I'd be happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you, Mary. Would the applicant care to add anything to Mary's presentation?
Hello again. I guess all I can say is what Mary said. I don't know that I have anything to add. I'll sure answer any questions. If anybody's got anything.
All right. Thank you, Dean. Is there any member of the public who cares to speak on this item?
Yes, thank you. My name is Kevin Stewart. I live at 1060 Home Circle on the Horseshoe Street there. I'm concerned. Unfortunately, we've already had some major developments in the area, and they've had negative impact upon my neighbors to the east. Noise, lighting, kind of invasion of privacy, as you will. Unfortunately, it's not something we were able to foretell before the storage facility was put in. That would be right across the property in question from East 24th. Also, we had no idea that Lawrence Kia would expand in such a major way, where they have a huge parking lot at 31st and Haskell Avenue, where they shuttle vehicles back and forth, which has negatively impacted the traffic on East 24th. When I moved in December of '97, there was absolutely no thoroughfare there on East 24th. It was actually a blocked street there at the eastern leg of our circle. We expected that probably wasn't going to be permanent, but we also didn't realize that, the storage facility that moved in was going to have a 2-story building just the other side of my neighbor's backyard. And that's kind of where the invasion of privacy is. There's a lot of lighting that has impacted my neighbors to the east negatively. I think my biggest concern is having this opening up of East 24th. McConnell Machinery has always had kind of a little horseshoe drive there where they park combines and all kinds of equipment outside, and they've been good neighbors in that way, and that they haven't, added to the traffic on East 24th. Unfortunately, and I know I had 3 minutes, and I'm really not prepared, but when I was on, we also didn't realize that the expansion of Brian Sorensen's business there was going to be to the extent that it was when he moved from East 25th on back. There's light in my neighbor's backyards 24/7 from that building that was put up there. There's nothing I can do about that now, probably, but that facility is also added to the traffic on East 24th. The full apartment structure that's up in there to the east of them adds traffic that didn't exist before we moved in. But right there, I just think that East 24th access is a concern for me, because what I was hoping was if that vacant lot was going to be developed, that it wouldn't. And I do have neighbors that have some of these same concerns, and they weren't able to show up, fear of falling and all that. But
I understand. Time, please.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comment on this item? Mr. Grove, would you care to, anything to add after those comments? Okay. Then we will bring it back up to the commission for further discussion on either the rezoning or the preliminary plat. Commissioner Willie.
So occasionally we do get a traffic study when we have something that's being proposed. To Mr. Stewart's point, has there been any look at the traffic implications of a development of this property?
No, the city engineer indicated that he would need a traffic study when they proposed any development. With this plat, they're just dividing the lots, but he said with any site plan, he would require a traffic study.
Okay, so that would be to come at another step then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I would entertain a motion, if any. Further discussion?
I just want to say this whole area back in here is just such a hodgepodge of mixed use. And yeah, I'm guilty of using 24th Street as a cut through sometimes.
We need people here or?
Yeah, well, probably more people than will admit it. But, yeah, I don't know, one thing about the preliminary, the proposed draft plan here that I find attractive is the use of that detention pond as the buffer, because right across the street, that storage unit is right up at the fence line in people's backyards, and I like that. And since, you know, looking at our agenda tonight, we're going to be voting on whether to look at lighting, revisiting that. I think this is, I hope that, you know, when we get to that point, there'll be a serious look at what type of lighting will be in there so it doesn't add to that light pollution in that area with all those industries right next to the single-family housing and the residential and everything else. But I am encouraged that this is a step forward toward getting some control over what's happening in that little area and perhaps improving the whole character over there. So I'm kind of in favor of going with the replat and seeing what, and their preliminary plans here, and see what comes out of this. I do share that concern about what's going to be added to the traffic, because there's a lot of heavy trucks that are using 24th Street in and out of some of those businesses. I mean, some big trucks. Because one of our current city commissioners had her business back there, Carlson Engineering. Her big drills, trucks, and everything else moving in and out. In fact, that business is still back there, although it's a different owner. So I know what's going up and down that street, and I hope we're not adding to all that. But this looks like it's going to be cars as opposed to big trucks. So at least under the current things, I'm hoping that all those things are taken into consideration so we don't aggravate the situation beyond what's possible with that road right now. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and make the motion if I can find it. Which one is it?
I don't disagree with the result.
Well, I'd make the motion that we approve the rezoning request, or recommend approval of the rezoning request for approximately 1.768 acres from RS10 district to CS commercial strip, forwarding that to the city commission.
We have a motion to approve. Do you have a second? Commissioner Willen. Thank you. Any further commission discussion? Seeing none, let's have a vote. All those in favor of the approval, please raise your hand. Motion carries 9-0. Care to continue with item 2B, the preliminary plat?
I would make the motion to recommend approval of the preliminary plat of 8N Business Center and forward that to the city commission.
We approve it.
We're approving by.
We approve it.
Oh, we approve it, that's right.
I'll second it if you need it.
All right. You need a second. Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Any further discussion on the motion to approve the preliminary plat? Seeing none. All those in favor of approval, please raise your hand. Motion carries 9-0. Thank you.
I'm getting tired.
On to, thank you, sir.
I can't see that far anymore.
On to item 4A, 3900 West 6th Street. Hello again, Mary.
There are two items with this, and there's also a miscellaneous item that's associated with this project. We'll look at the zoning and a special use permit for a car wash for the property that's generally addressed as 3900 West 6th Street. It is in the northwest corner of the intersection of Monterey Way and West 6th Street. It is part of what's considered the Hy-Vee Shopping Center. It's formerly known as the Monterey Center. And their plan is to tear down what the former Applebee's restaurant, to reconfigure the lots to make a larger lot here, and then to install a car wash in this location. With the rezoning, we'll look at the golden factors. The zoning in the area is predominantly commercial on the northwest and the southeast corners of the intersection. The Monterey planned commercial district, the Monterey Center, was the northwest corner. However, in 2011, I believe, a portion of that was zoned CN2. And so that leaves the subject property isolated from the rest of the planned commercial development. This rezoning would provide a uniform zoning district in this area. It would not affect the planned commercial district because it's not required for any of the common open space. The center will still function as an overall center. It uses shared parking, so we'll calculate the parking over the total center. It shouldn't have any negative impacts removing it through this rezoning. Looking at the land use, this is just an aerial. You can see the Hy-Vee store, the strip shopping center here, the former Applebee's. To the west, we have a convenience store with a gas station. So the proposed use being a car wash, you would have two auto-related uses kind of on each side of that shopping center. We have an office on the east side of Monterey Way, and we have offices primarily on the west side of 6th Street. We have a bank and a former funeral home, which is empty right now, and more offices further to the east. We do have a residence to the south. This is that UR zoning. It means it was annexed, but no development has been proposed yet. And we have a RS zone property here, which is just a vacant piece of property. The character of the neighborhood is predominantly residential, with the exception of the 6th Street corridor. And as I mentioned, it's primarily the northwest and the southeast corners are developed with commercial uses and offices. And the proposed use and zoning would be compatible with the character of the neighborhood and with the existing zoning and land uses. We also look at Horizon 2020. It recommends encouraging infill development or redevelopment of existing commercial areas with an emphasis on downtown and existing commercial gateways. It also identifies West 6th Street as a gateway. So it would be appropriate to have redevelopment of this area. It specifically references this intersection as an existing neighborhood commercial center. It does not recommend expanding it beyond the existing commercially zoned property. So rezoning would just be changing the commercial zone. We would not be expanding it. And therefore, the zoning request is seen as being in conformance with the comprehensive plan. There is no adopted area plan for this area. Once again, we look at detrimental effects on nearby properties. With a car wash, possible detrimental effects could come from exterior lighting, possibly from noise. The access points, it'll use the same access points. And the city traffic engineer reviewed the traffic impact study and determined there should be no significant impact on traffic in the area, and I'll talk about that a little more in detail when I go through this special use permit. The applicant provided a noise study, which is included with your packet, which indicates that the noise level should drop off shortly after you get outside the door of the car wash. And so no detrimental effects are expected on nearby properties. The green area is area that's required to be green space. There are a considerable number of easements. There's a gas line along Monterey Way, and so there's a large building setback in that area, and there's the 50-foot setback on 6th Street that Catherine had talked about with her item. That also applies in this area, except they did get a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals so that this access drive could encroach into that setback slightly. And that variance is contingent upon this special use permit, so it's tied to this use. And then the suitability of the property to the uses to which it's restricted with the current zoning. There's very few differences between the PCD1, which is a very limited commercial zoning in the pre-2006 development code, and with the current CN2, which is neighborhood commercial center zoning. There was a list of the uses, kind of a comparison table with the staff report. This table just kind of summarizes the changes. The PCD zoning allows these following uses that the CN2 does not: a halfway house or rehabilitation center, institution for children or aged, a hospital, laboratories, medical or dental. Uses that are permitted in CN2 but that are not permitted in the PCD district would be public safety, such as police stations or fire stations, and mixed media stores. And that's like a bookstore or something that has a sexual component to it. New uses that are allowed in the CN2 district as a result of recent text amendments include an event center and then maker spaces, limited or intensive with a special use permit. Now, the car wash is allowed in some degree in the PCD zoning, the existing zoning. It allows a single bay when in conjunction with a convenience store, but that's not the type of use that's being proposed. They're proposing a standalone car wash, and that is allowed in the CN2 district with the approval of a special use permit. And the special use permit allows us to look at specific conditions. It allows us to review each site based on its own specific characteristics. So if there was a residence nearby or some other use that we would see an impact on, we could apply certain conditions to mitigate those impacts. And so the property is actually suited to the uses it's allowed in the PC district as well as in the proposed CN2 district. It's just that CN2 is necessary for the uses that they desire. Other things we look at is what is the length of time the subject property has been vacant as zoned. It's not vacant, it's developed, but it has an empty restaurant. The Applebee's vacated the site sometime last year. And the comparison of the effects of denial. If the rezoning request is denied, the property owner would need to wait until another development proposal came forward. That would be allowed in the PCD1 zoning. The benefits to the public health, safety, and welfare of denial we don't anticipate any benefits because the proposed development is not expected to have any negative impacts on nearby properties or on the traffic at the corner. And so staff recommends forwarding this rezoning request to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact in the staff report. And then I'll move on to the special use permit. And I mentioned earlier that there are site constraints as far as to the location of the building and the reason why there's quite a bit of green space. The yellow area is the overhead lines for Westar. They have a easement which prohibits placement of buildings in that area. The red area is the building setback from the gas line along Monterey Way, and then the green area to the south is that 50-foot setback, and you can see how their access drive encroaches into that slightly. The special use permit site plan is on the left. It shows the green space. It has the access drive. No changes being made to the access on Monterey Way. They'll use the same access point. Access will be taken into the site. There'll be 3 access aisles to go into the car wash. There's an exit drive for someone who changes their mind and doesn't want to go through with the car wash. And then there are vacuum stalls up to the north side. These are separated from the property line by 20 feet. They're required to be separated by 15 feet, but due to the gas line setback and easement, they need to be set back a little further. So we have quite a bit of green space surrounding the car wash from the properties to the east and the south. The landscaping plan shows the landscaping that's going to be put in the green space. We have street trees and surrounding the property. There'll be foundation plantings around the building. We also have buffer yard plantings to the south to buffer it from the RSO zoning across 6th Street. These are mostly native grasses and ornamental grasses. Where the vacuum bays are, you can see the green areas. If you can see the green, those are evergreen shrubs that are being planted to buffer the vacuum bays from the development across Monterey Way. Other things we look at is the parking. As I mentioned, the Monterey Center uses shared parking. The car wash requires stacked parking, which they have adequate stacked parking. They also require 2 parking spaces per bay, which they'll need 2 spaces, and 1 van accessible ADA space. They're providing 3 with 1 ADA van accessible space. So when you look at the overall center, when it was developed with Applebee's, they were required to have 402 spaces with 11 ADA spaces, and they had 506 with 16 ADA spaces. With the removal of Applebee's and removal of the parking that was surrounding it and replacing the use with the car wash, it now requires 387 spaces with 8 ADA spaces, and the site has 442 spaces with 15. So we're still providing the amount of parking that that commercial center needs. The applicant provided elevations showing the design of the building. Originally, it was mostly all red, and we based on our commercial design standards, we needed to have more native stone, something to tie it to the rest of the commercial development, so they redesigned their layout, and we do have the stone towers. This will be the north side that you would see coming from the south, if you enter off Monterey Way. This would be the entrance. You would see this from 6th Street. This is the view from Hy-Vee side, and this is the view from Monterey. However, the vacuum bays in this elevation are shown right adjacent to the building, and in this plan, they're actually moved more to the north, just because the space isn't wide enough to allow them in that location. We did receive some public communications, and they were included in your packet, and there were 3 primary concerns that the public raised. One was noise. What would the noise level be? Would it be impactful to people walking by or to nearby residences? The applicant provided the noise study, and this is the summary of the noise study of how loud it is right at the blower area. Is very loud, about 86 decibels, and they noted that they would advise their employees to wear hearing or ear protection at that location where the sound levels are high. Once you get to the door and you're 20 feet outside the door, the decibel level reduces to 66 decibels, and this area is shown here in red, and then the decibel level would get less. So you'll have noise on the site, but once you get to the property line, the noise level should be very similar to the surrounding area. The traffic, I mentioned that the traffic engineer did review their traffic impact study, which was also included with your packet, and she noted that at the peak hour, they're expecting 27 more trips an hour than Applebee's would have had, and she said that would not be enough to cause an impact to this intersection. Our city utilities engineer requested considerable information on the amount of water they would use and the amount of water they would discharge into the city's sanitary sewer system. These little spots on the left side, that's their water recycling facility. So they will be recycling some of the water they use. So they provided a water fixture count, and they provided information the city utilities engineer requested, and she noted that we did have this capacity in our sanitary sewer lines to accommodate the amount of water they would be discharging. And so staff recommends approval of the special use permit based on the findings of the fact and subject to the conditions in the report. And those conditions, I don't know if I put that on the next page. Nope. They were primarily that the minor subdivision needed to be recorded prior to the special use permit plans being released for building permits, and also a provision of a revised special use permit plans with minor changes. With the minor subdivision, there's a master street tree plan, and if any changes are made to that, we need to make sure they're reflected on the special use permit plan. And then some technical changes, some notes and changes to tables that are pretty minor. And did you want me to go ahead and talk about the variance, or would you like to talk about that
Let's go
later?
ahead and proceed with that.
Okay. They're requesting a variance from the requirement we have in the subdivision regulations that a principal arterial have 150 feet of right-of-way. That's 75 feet on east side of the center line. West 6th Street in this area currently has 100 feet of right-of-way, about 50 feet on each side of the center line. When we have developed streets like this, we typically ask our city engineer if he needs additional right-of-way. Occasionally he needs it because the street's going to be widened. For instance, with the previous application, he did need the additional right-of-way on 23rd Street for future improvements. He noted he did not need it on 6th Street because they were not planning any future improvements. And this shows the alignment of the 6th Street right-of-way. It's very consistent throughout the area. We do have a little bit more in this corner, and a little bit more was dedicated here. But the city engineer said no additional right-of-way is needed here, so he's supportive of the variance request. And then this just shows some of the site constraints. We have the easements, and then we have also just the setbacks and other items, which would create a hardship. One of the criteria we look at when the Planning Commission looks at a variance is there an unnecessary hardship? And the hardship would be having to redesign the site because you have less area once you dedicate the additional right-of-way. And would it be unnecessary? It would be because the city engineer said there's no need for the right-of-way. They're not planning the improvements. The other things we look at, is it in harmony with the subdivision regulations, with the intent? And the intent is to have an orderly development that can handle the infrastructure that we need. And based on the city engineer's recommendation, this would be in harmony with that. And then the last criteria is, does it protect the public health, safety, and welfare? And since we do have adequate right-of-way, the health, safety, and welfare would be protected. So staff does recommend approval of the variance request as well.
Thank you, Mary. The applicant or a representative, please.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Austin Davis, and I am one of the owners of Wild Pines Ventures. also known as the applicant. I'm grateful to be accompanied tonight by a number of my partners who also just happen to be my family. My mother and father, Lloyd and Tamara Davis, my uncle, Bryant Fike, and siblings and cousins as well. I'm also joined tonight by our engineer, Harlan Russell, with GBA in Lenexa, Kansas, and our attorney, Matt Goff, with Barbara Emerson here in Lawrence. I'm excited to have the chance to tell you guys about Tommy's Express. We decided to become a franchisee of theirs because, number one, they've been in business for 45 years, and much like our family-owned business, they're great people, and we share the same values and the same commitment to excellence, and the technical and mechanical support that they will provide to us will greatly benefit us. They are also in the business of building some of the most advanced car washes, some of the most high efficient car washes, and the best quality car washes. You have received a letter from me this afternoon discussing some of the ways that Tommy Car Washes do a great job at reducing water usage and noise levels. I know that Harlan and Matt can discuss further questions that you may have. We believe this site is ideal for a Tommy's Express car wash, and I look personally forward to the opportunity to invest and grow with the City of Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you.
He didn't mention it was a handoff instead of a conclusion, unfortunately. I am Matt Goff with Barbara Emerson Law Firm, and I'm going to move over to our presentation, which is not near as nice as Mary's. I should probably just keep it on hers. But there's a lot of the same things in our presentation that were in Mary's, so I'm going to breeze through quite a bit of this. I think it's worth noting that, and Austin didn't mention this, but early on in the process, having submitted the application and going through the first rounds of comments with the staff, there was a person who indicated they represented the Monterey area neighborhood, and I think it was part of a neighborhood chat. But Austin exchanged some emails with that person, provided some information, said, you know, we'd love to meet with you and anyone else who'd like to talk with us. Would you like to meet? Several emails, and the response was, no, we don't have any questions for you at this time. So there was no neighborhood meeting given that response. The letter you received today was provided mainly to respond to those two communications that you received yesterday morning, I believe. And I'm now aware that those two authors are here with us too, and I had a brief chance to speak with them before the meeting. So we'll see how things go. I'm going to touch briefly on the rezoning. I know most of these issues are about the SUP, but we are combining all these matters. I think there's three primary takeaways on the rezoning. The request for CN2 is very similar in uses to what's already there. By approving this zoning, you're eliminating some uses that are permitted that maybe would not be as desirable. So we're taking some potential bad uses off the table. And three, that the request meets all the golden factors. It's compliant with the comprehensive plan. It's compatible with nearby uses. It fits in with the character of the neighborhood, and I particularly like the comment that Mary made that there's no public benefit in denial. I'll take that any time, Mary. Okay, so moving on to the SUP. Again, Mary's done a great job of explaining the factors that go into granting an SUP as set forth in the development code. Austin's letter itemized the summaries and the conclusions from the staff report, and I'm not going to repeat them here, but category by category, the staff was in favor of this, and we would certainly echo those comments. The pavement, the portions of the project that are impervious are decreasing by 3,468 feet. I think that's noteworthy. You don't see redevelopments infill that actually reduce impervious surfaces. We discussed the fact that the applicant was asked to and did make major revisions to their site plan. Apparently in the industry for these types of projects, there's something known as the Tommy Red, and that the site was supposed to be more red, and they kind of like that trademark red, but no, here we have the version that complies better with the existing commercial center. This again is the part that you would see if you were looking from the north. So if you're walking out of Chipotle, that may be what you see. And this is the view from the south where you're exiting. Did I just get that mixed up? No. I didn't. Yeah, no, I'd say if people enter that way, swing around. This, if you're driving by it on Iowa, this is what you'd see as people go in. Of course, there'd be more trees and things. They're not shown there. And then the side elevation, you've seen this before. We can stop and talk about it if you want to. Those rows of vacuums have moved. I do want to touch upon this graphic a little bit, and Mary touched on it too. There are easements all over the place on this site, which has made it a little bit interesting in fitting a building. You can see there's absolutely zero, I mean, this is fine, there's no problem with it, but we go right up to the easement demarcation lines on these two locations and needed a variance down here to have that little bit of access drive allowed in this parking and building setback line. The good news is, because of these easements, the exit of the car wash here to the north has to be tucked back. This overhead power line is 100 feet wide, 50 feet there and 50 feet there, if you can follow the hand I'm drawing on this. So right there you have a buffer, and if distance is your ally in terms of sound, and here's the comparison between the 2018 noise study from like January and the 2008 study, the blowers have gotten more quiet. There's less horsepower. They go from 15 to 10. The housing's different. It used to be plastic, I think. Now it must be something better. What's better than plastic? But anyway, the farther you get away from the entrance to the car wash, the less you notice the fact that there's a blower making noise. And that's the loudest component. So I got my ruler out, and might be able to zoom in. If you draw some lines from the distance between the exit and that access point, that's approximately 65 feet. If you go to that access point, you're looking at around 92 feet. If you're going to the west there, or to the east there, excuse me, to the sidewalk, right there I think is the edge of a sidewalk, 65 feet. And then just for fun, I drew a line through the building as the crow flies to the middle of West 6th Street. And that's 185 feet. And then across the street, you start getting to the residential houses and where some of the folks who wrote communications, you know, it's 750 plus feet to their back doors. So hopefully that orientation and distance helps assuage concerns of folks to the south. And of course to the north, here's the, it's not on the map, but there's that strip center right there. So essentially, we're pleased to stand for your questions. Very pleased with all the help from Mary Miller and the staff. But please let us know if there's concerns we haven't addressed yet.
Thank you very much. I'll let you know if we have more questions after our public comment period. We welcome public comment. We love to hear from you. If you have something to say about this application, please approach the microphone. Tell us who you are and where you live.
Hi, my name is Roger Mason. I was asked to carry a letter from the owner of the strip center behind the car wash. He's down with flu, couldn't get here. I don't know if this letter got here in time for Mary to get it into the packet. I believe he missed the deadline, so he asked if I would bring it over. I can either read it into the record or just give it to Mary. And it basically...
I beg your pardon?
Put it on the Elmo.
Or you can read it out loud if you can read in 3 minutes.
I just don't want to slow the meeting down. You guys are on a roll. Dear Mary, as we discussed on the phone conversation yesterday, I had planned to be at this evening's Planning Commission meeting, but an unexpected case of flu has me sidelined for a couple days. Since I was unable to attend as owner of the property, please convey my situation to the Planning Commission and let them know that we fully support the rezoning and special use permit for Tommy's Car Wash at this time. Please bear in mind that we have a multi-million-dollar investment in our shopping center directly north of the subject property, and we are very prudent in deciding what types of uses would be good or not good for our center, and we plan to hold it for a long time. Tommy's Car Wash first came to our attention when they built a beautiful facility in prestigious part of southern Johnson County at 107th and Row in Overland Park, Kansas. They have a first-class building from an aesthetic standpoint, and they run a first-class business as well. We feel they would be a very nice complement to the rest of our center, and they would bring additional business for the tenants that we currently have in the center. At the same time, they are segregated from the remainder of our center so that their traffic pattern will not adversely affect other portions of the development. They are also compatible with other commercial uses in the immediate area. Their location on the southeast corner of our development is right at the intersection of the street, which leaves them far enough away from any residential areas so they will not create problems for the residences. In addition of a car wash to this area will be an asset to nearby residents and to those who frequent our shopping center, as they will provide a service-based business that everyone needs and uses. We believe that Tommy's Car Wash at this location creates a win-win situation for everyone, and we ask the support of the City Planning Commission for this rezoning and special use request. Signed by Steve Choykett. So I'll
Thank
just
you.
submit this, so if you have any other questions, ask those guys.
Thank you, sir. Any further public comment? All right. Anything the applicant would like to add after that lengthy public comment period?
No.
Short and sweet. Then we'll bring it back up here to the commission for discussion. Questions of staff or applicant?
I just have one question for the applicant as to what hours of operations. I heard there were going to be employees. Is this, how late into the evening is the car wash open normally?
The franchised hours are 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. There will be they typically like to have 4 employees on staff. Obviously, if someone's sick, that could change things. Myself will be there. So I'm told you can run that car wash with 1 to 2 people. So hope that answers those questions.
That was only because, the sound seems to carry farther when you get a reduction in the traffic noise. Because, living by a grain silo myself, you can't hear that blower until the middle of the night, and then it really carries. So that's what I was asking that question about.
Commissioner Willie?
We had some public comment in the written communications about noise and decibel levels, and that it seems as though they had from the old study, which now we have the newer study with the newer models. So I just wanted to make sure that I have that correct, that the mention of like 90 decibels several feet out of the door was from the old study, and that the newer equipment is more like 67. Is that what I was seeing? If you want to just comment to that.
Yes, that's correct. With the newer equipment, it is the lower number. I don't know what the exact figure is. And
Okay.
I believe inside the actual tunnel, it is 5 foot inside, 85 decibels, which is actually even lower than that's the 2008 study of 5 foot outside the door. So I could stand 5 feet away from the nozzle and it's still 15 decibels or 16 decibels lower.
And the neighbors have been made aware of the newer numbers?
Yes, as of the letter that we submitted to you guys, they were provided that as well.
Okay. Have there been any studies done about the noise level from the vacuum units themselves that are also outdoors and kind of more, a little bit, situated a little bit closer to the residences to the northeast?
To my knowledge, no. Chris, can you?
How are we doing? My name is Chris Michael. I'm an owner-operator and the distributor in the area for Tommy's. We have the building in Overland Park, also Warrensburg, Missouri, and Joplin. There's a few different types of vacuums that we will consider for this location. Noise is always an issue that we look at for that aspect. With some of our new technologies and new plastics, actually, and the densities of them, we're able to dampen those quite a bit. We don't foresee that to be an issue. Currently, we have our Tommy vacuums running within 50 feet of an actual single-family residence in the city of Joplin, with only a 8-foot barrier wall on that, and that conformed to theirs, to answer that specifically. So we will be in line with that same aspect, and with the road in between, there shouldn't be any issue at all on that. And as for the dryer room as well, what you see there is a difference in the plastic and also in the fan that we use. As well, in the 2008 study was not inside of our current building. Our current building, we're using new materials for sound dampening actually inside the room as well. That does not protrude outside the building. So that's what some of those advances that you're seeing there in sound, to be able to make sure that we're not a negative impact on any aspect of it. Anything else I can answer for you on that?
No, thank you.
You got it, yeah.
Commissioner Sands.
I had a question for staff. Since we have already had the discussion about spot zoning tonight, what was the impetus behind rezoning that area to CN2? Did it have to do with the various easements and you could only fit a certain type building in there?
Are you talking about the current?
The current zoning.
No, the impetus is that they wanted to have the car wash, and it's not allowed in PC1.
I'm sorry, I probably misspoke on my question. The current zoning was rezoned different than that commercial node.
The current zoning is PCD.
PCD. Why was it zoned to PCD? Why was that area rezoned to PCD?
Well, actually, the whole area was PCD.
Okay.
And then there was that thin strip in
That's
between.
commercial
that was
node.
zoned to CN2.
Okay.
And that was for the commercial strip. I think they had
Okay.
some uses that just weren't allowed in PCD1,
Okay.
as it was rezoned.
Yeah, we had rezoned the Little Caesars drive-through window several years back for the same purpose. It didn't fit in PCD1. It required a zoning to our new code is now 11 years old. We still call it the new code.
Mhm.
That's why.
Okay. Well, I applaud the applicant for being able to find a project that fits in that. I mean, if that were a golf shot, it'd probably be a hole-in-one.
Commissioner Kelly.
Question for staff. So I've learned more about car washes in reading the packet than I ever knew, and blower systems and the volume of them. And I'm excited to hear that there's walls now that create a dampener for noise. That's exciting. But this always comes up in these special use permits. So we get a lot of promises and we get a lot of, it'll be quiet. You can't hear it across the street. It'll be good. What's our recourse if we don't put in those wonderful dampening walls and the plastic breaks and it's 104 decibels instead of 86?
Well, we'll do our review on the building permit to the best of our ability, but you're taking it on faith that, and these technologies have changed over time. And so, I think you're looking at it from the reasonableness of it, and the context of the distance and things. There are car washes closer to residential uses that we're site planning now, in fact. So,
There was a time when we thought robotic parking was cool, so.
No, it still is. It still is.
I just want to make sure that we're thinking through all these technologies and the reasonableness of it.
Yeah, I think this is a little more tried and true,
Okay.
just in America, than robotic parking. But Yeah, you just have to go on trust that
Okay.
the technology is there and be comfortable with some of the distance and what your knowledge of is, because we've had a few of these newer car washes in the city now, so it's not a completely foreign concept like robotic parking.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Hey, I voted for it. Yes. Count me as a convert.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. Anybody else? Further discussion among commissioners?
I might add, as a special use permit, though, we would have greater recourse and enforcement measures than a straight zoning site. And we still have some enforcement abilities with a site plan, but I think the SUP gets it in front of the governing body if they're not compliant.
Commissioner Culver.
Along those lines, with car washes requiring an SUP, do you have any knowledge as to why we require that specifically for those types of uses?
Well, typically an SUP is put into the code as an SUP because it may be it's a use that may be compatible in certain instances, or it may not be compatible, or it may be compatible with conditions. Not conditional zoning, but conditions on the special use permit. And so that's why it's a special use permit in a CN2, which is more of a neighborhood commercial.
Okay. That neighborhood
It's
component
the
to it?
neighborhood component,
Okay,
correct.
thanks.
Any further discussion? Yes, Commissioner Willie.
Also in reference to the written communications we got, there were concerns about how much is going into the sanitary sewer versus how much is going to be runoff. And it seems to me that it's all probably going to be channeled into the sanitary sewer, except parking lot runoff and such, which would be dealt with otherwise. Is there any other concern for that? Or I mean, the sanitary sewer says that they can handle it, so we're comfortable with that?
Yeah, on the subject of storm sewer, we'll actually would expect that the downstream residents would see less impact because we increase the green space on the site. So we have more area for the rainwater to basically soak into. On the sanitary sewer side, we work with city staff through Mary, by the way, who I want to commend her while I'm standing here. Mary always answers the phone. When she doesn't answer the phone, she calls you back within an hour. I've been doing this for 30 years. You have a jewel in Mary in her commitment to communicating back with developers and engineers. And that is a blessing today. So I'll use my soapbox briefly for that. Thank you so much, Mary. But we worked back and forth with Mary to provide those calculations for fixture counts. Actually, we had more fixtures in the Applebee's building than what we're proposing, and then we worked with staff as well on the actual water that's used in the car wash process, and convinced the staff, or provided enough data to the staff that they felt like the capacity was there, or they said that the capacity was there, thus not requiring any much larger downstream study on the sanitary sewer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further commissioner discussion? Would entertain a motion. Commissioner Sands.
I'd like to make a motion to rezone approximately 1.33 acres located at 3900 Monterey Way from CN2 to PCD. From CN2 and PCD district to CN2. And forward that to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact found in the body of the staff report.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? Second. Commissioner Weaver, thank you. Is there any further discussion on the rezoning approval? Motion is to approve. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve and recommend approval to the City Commission, please raise your hand. Carries 9-0. Carry on with the SUP. I'm sorry, with the SUP.
I'd like to make a motion to approve a special use permit for Tommy's Car Wash on approximately 1.33 acres located at 3900 West 6th Street, and forward that item to the City Commission with a recommendation of approval subject to the conditions enumerated 1 through 3, A through E.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the SUP and recommend approval to the City Commission. Do we have a second? Commissioner Willie, thank you. Further discussion on the
Just a
SUP?
comment.
Commissioner Kelly.
So I live a half mile away from this. That's my grocery store. That was my Applebee's, my neighborhood bar and grill. Yes. And I see a couple of my neighbors here and understand that there's some nerves here by approving this special use permit on the volume. I listened to the response about the vacuums, and I'm actually not so concerned about the blowers as I am those outdoor vacuums that are vacuum out cars every day. And we have to trust. I mean, that's part of the development and all those things. And I know we have some spots in those special use permits to enforce, but I really hope that what we're sharing tonight is I'm not going to hear it at my house I don't think I'll hear it half a mile away, but those volumes are of concern, and I'm sure you guys can't wait to come check out the new technology at the car wash. So I see those neighbors here, and I just want you to know we have that concern as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. Further discussion before a vote on the SUP? Seeing none, all those in favor of recommending approval, please raise your hand. 9-0. Passes. And let us proceed to miscellaneous variance. I'm not looking at you, Commissioner Sands.
I'm trying to figure out what the motion is. I guess I'd make a motion to approve a variance. Miscellaneous item number 1, variance at 3900 West 6th Street. Per section 220-808C5 of the subdivision regulations to allow a reduced right-of-way for 3900 West 6th Street. And do we forward that to the city commission or no? We okay?
Approve that. We have a motion to approve the variance request. Do we have a second? Second. Thank you, Commissioner Culver. Any further discussion on the variance? And seeing none? Oh,
Sorry.
please.
I do think it's worth saying, even though the people in question are not here anymore, we were asked to look at, a reduced right-of-way on 6th Street West. That's a totally different animal than what we're looking at here, which this just basically maintains the status quo, whereas that would, the right-of-way actually is required to be wider at the West 6th Street. So I just to throw it out there for the record that this is a very different beast than what we were asked to look at before.
I think it's a good point. One's a building, one's a 8 feet of an access drive. I think that's notable.
Well,
That's
this
worth
is to conform with the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
This is appropriate. In the other area, that right-of-way actually was needed to be 75
Yeah.
feet wide, so. That's all.
Thank you for that clarification. Well, then, let's have a vote. All those in favor of approving the variance request, please raise your hand. Motion carries 9-0. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
All right. Shall we proceed with the text amendments?
Yes. These can be fairly quick.
Miscellaneous?
Miscellaneous number 2.
Miscellaneous number 2. This is a request initiated by staff requesting that you start the process to allow for a text amendment that would allow group homes in the GPI district. The staff has been working with the county and with the design team for the crisis center. What we have uncovered is that it is not clear in the code where group homes are allowed as they relate to the GPI district. especially for a larger group home that includes more than 8 individuals. So this request would ask that you initiate the text amendment, that we would prepare and bring back to you at a future meeting to address the use tables in the development code.
All right. It's always nice when we get to do something for the staff.
Make more work for them.
Yes, Commissioner Commissioner Willie.
I move that we initiate the text amendment from the City of Lawrence Development Code to permit group homes in the GPI district.
We have a motion and a second
Second.
from Commissioner Sands. Any further commission discussion?
I just have a real quick question.
Okay.
So is this one of these scenarios in which the code was developed, there wasn't a hashed out concept of what a group home was and is and should be, and so we're just merely tacking something on, or?
No, the code defines a group home. It does not currently permit group homes in the GPI district.
Oh, I'm sorry.
However, state law says anywhere you allow a single-family home, you must also allow a group home. So there's some interpretation. We have 2 types of group homes. One is a smaller, one is a larger. So the one with 8 or fewer residents would be the single-family home, and there's an interpretation that that could be allowed. The larger one, which is probably what we're going to be seeing with the county project, not so clear.
Okay.
And we allow single-family homes in GPI, so we have to allow them.
I see.
We have to allow the group. We allow single-family. We have to allow group homes as well. So we're going to look at both sizes of them, in part to accommodate the Burt Nash proposal that we anticipate coming in.
But you did second that motion, did you not, Commissioner
did.
Sands?
I did, yes.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. All those in favor of initiating the text amendment? 9-0.
Thank you.
On to the outdoor lighting.
I don't have a presentation, I just wanted to pull this up so I can remember my different items. Our development code has a section where we discuss outdoor lighting on public and private property, not street lights, but we discuss the field lighting for recreational sports and, parking lot lighting, building lighting. We don't consider LED lighting. That was a technology that wasn't in place when the development code was written. And we have a lot of LED lighting applications coming forward, so we're trying to apply what we have and kind of come up with equivalencies, but we would like to develop standards that apply directly to LED lighting to make sure that we're treating them correctly. So we would ask you to initiate a text amendment to allow us to update the standards for outdoor lighting to include LED lighting.
Okay. Any comments or discussion on this? Then Commissioner Payton.
How specific, I didn't look at this, but how specific does that terminology get? Like, I assume it would say this kind of LED lighting with this kind of, with this color temperature. This came up the other day before I even realized it was in the agenda with the city commissioner, so.
We didn't really know until we developed it, but I know we look at things such as glare, how can you measure glare? And when do you need a full cutoff light? Right now, a 150-watt incandescent needs full cutoff. So we have to use the lumen equivalent to tell when an LED might need it. And we may look at lighting colors. If the city has adopted that, we might incorporate that as well, lighting temperatures, so.
You can look forward to hundreds of pages of information.
So we're going to learn a lot, right? It's like artificial.
Sort of like the AstroTurf saga we had where Mary presented over 1,000 pages of information to the commission. But you may be tracking that there's a discussion of streetlights and the color temperature. And so LEDs really are, they're good and bad. So we need to catch up to the technology. It's that big of an impact out there. So. we'll probably end up getting pretty specific, but we're not quite sure because we literally haven't done much of any drafting of the regulations yet.
And do the, does our development code talk about street lights, about street lighting?
No, streetlights
Okay,
exempt
because those
from
are
the
gonna be-
development code.
those are
So
all,
we apply our development code only to private projects, which could be public projects as well, but
Sure.
right-of-way is exempt.
Better care to make a motion?
Make a
Then I-
motion.
Okay, go ahead.
I make a motion to initiate a text amendment to Articles 11 and 17, Chapter 20 of the City of Lawrence Land Development Code to update the outdoor lighting standards to address new lighting technology.
I'll second that. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. 9-0. And fourth item. Go to North Lawrence.
This rezoning is kind of a follow-up on a former rezoning. In 2003, 912 North 3rd Street had a rezoning request. It was approved subject to the condition that a site plan be approved, which addressed their exterior storage. Since that time, things have changed. They no longer have exterior storage, and a site plan was approved last year for a food truck, which they site planned their property for that. Therefore, they've met the condition, but that was so old that we thought it would be better to go through the process and just redo the rezoning. And so part of this property is already zoned. This is another one of those cases where the back half was annexed but not rezoned to an appropriate district. And so with this rezoning, we'll just be following through on that former rezoning and making it all one zoning district.
Thank you. Any discussion from commissioners? Questions? Motion? Do it.
Motion to rezone eastern .46 acres approximately with the parcel address as 912 North 3rd Street from Urban Reserve to CS Commercial Strip to complete the rezoning process.
I'll second that. Any further discussion? Seeing none? All those in favor, please raise your hand. 9-0. Man, we are good at this. 1212 Louisiana.
This rezoning request came out of a non-conforming use research project. The property owner at 1212 wanted us to research his property to see if it was non-conforming. And indeed it was, because it had been rezoned to RMO. However, when we looked through the records, back in the 1970s, an application had come in for 1216 Louisiana, but when it put the lot number, it put the lot number for 1212 Louisiana. So the rezoning went through the process. The ordinance only listed the lot number, so it actually ended up rezoning the adjacent property. And so we contacted the property owner and asked him if he wanted to rezone, and he said he did, because right now his apartment there on the property is not conforming. So this is just to correct that mistake.
We fix.
Sheila's first year, coincidence? I don't know.
Oh, man.
How can you not vote for this? No. Our mistake, but you don't get it.
Who's got a motion?
I make a motion
All
to
right.
initiate rezoning for 1212 Louisiana Street to correct rezoning error made with ordinance number 4235.
I'll second that. Is there any further discussion? Then let's vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 9-0 again. Oh,
We get to see Scott do some work this time.
staff bylaws, all right. You know, every agenda item should take as long as that last one.
They could.
They could. There are cities. To make that decision right now. Public comment.
The last item, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Thought I would just very quickly highlight, not go through everything in your bylaws, but I do want to highlight, see, beginning on page 162. Apparently, this one's a lot different. Here we go. Okay. There we go. Okay. Just highlight a few things about about these revised bylaws that were the result of the City Commission's strategic plan effort to sort of align everybody's bylaws, commissions and boards bylaws, and implement a few elements into them. So Randy did the bulk of the work here on the legal components that I'll highlight as we go through here, and you can ask him any questions you have. And then we also took the opportunity to revise and refine to your current practices and the current agenda setup and those kinds of things. So I'll highlight a few things here as I go through here. A lot of minor changes. The first one I will highlight here is on the attendance issue. If you're follow along, or I'll try to bring this up here. And we have revised how attendance is taken for the commission, that a member having 3 or more unexcused absences or 5 or more absences for any reason during one calendar year shall be deemed by the commission to have involuntarily resigned his or her position. That's different than what your bylaws are today, in that there's a threshold, and then the chair sends a letter to the mayor, and we sort of try to compel attendance or resignation that way. So I wanted to highlight that.
And I assume we'll discuss these as a group. Are we going to motion individually?
No, you would make one motion for the bylaw
whole
adoption
pass.
at the
Okay.
end.
So any disagreement, we'd have to kick it back to staff?
You can either revise it today and approve them, adopt them yourself. One of the things that we did change at the very end is that now the city commission has asked to approve bylaws. And since you're a joint body, we added the city and county commissions to approve those. On page 4 of the document, just want to highlight that one of the things that came out of the process to look for consistencies or inconsistencies was general public comment component that the city commission wants all boards and commissions to have on their agenda. You'll see that it's actually on there tonight. I think we implemented it a couple months ago when we got the direction from the commission to place on your agenda a time for general public comment. Very rare here. It has happened. You might recall a lady brought a water quality issue to the commission. I think it was the last time it happened. Because it's very rare, and because we think those applicants who are here to conduct business with the commission kind of deserve to go first, we put it last on the agenda setup. So you can talk about where you want that placement if you like, but it's pretty rare for this commission. The next item I will just highlight is we've deleted a whole part of the bylaws that deal with consent agendas, because we don't do consent agendas. So it's pretty obvious why that occurred. The next highlight deals with our proposal to you to adjust how testimony is given. Currently, the applicant is given 10 minutes per item, up to a maximum of 30 minutes. Sometimes that gets negotiated between the chair and the staff and the applicant for long items. Members of the public representing themselves are 3 minutes. Representing a group is 5 minutes. And then it goes back to the applicant for a rebuttal or a response. We're recommending that you go to 3 minutes straight away. Yours is the only commission that distinguishes between individual and group, and so we can talk about, you can talk about that, but I'll just highlight it there for you, leave that for your future discussion here. I want to mention that our abstention policy was restated. I think this is one of the legal elements that Randy has been looking at all the different bylaws about, so he revised that accordingly. Same with many elements here. I'm not necessarily highlighting, but you'll see if it has to do with legal components. Randy looked at that. If it has to do with sort of this, what gets considered by the planning commission, that was planning staff looking at just updating it to current application types and that sort of thing. Again, because you often have questions about quasi-judicial conduct and ex parte communications, these were elements that Randy had revised for these bylaws. And then my last highlight is at the end, we maintain that the bylaws may be amended by 2/3 vote of the commission at any regular meeting, provided that you've been notified, and then adding that any amendments to the bylaws shall be approved by the city commission and the board of county commissioners before becoming effective. So if you approve this tonight, before it's effective, we still have to go to those governing bodies and get their adoption. Happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Scott.
I had a comment.
Commissioner Payton.
So the transportation also has the 3 minutes, 5 minutes for group that I believe
Transportation Commission,
also has the
Okay.
3 minutes and 5 minutes, although it was because the planning commission does. So I didn't know, I mean, if we're trying to bring these into, all together to sort of have the same bylaws, then if that's changed here, perhaps we're going to have to change it there also?
I'm not familiar with that's because that's staffed by a different department.
Uh-huh.
I'm not familiar unless Randy knows anything.
I was not involved in those.
Well, and I'm trying to figure out if you even went into the bylaws.
I was going to ask, is it in the bylaws?
You know, I should remember this. It's really awful that I don't, but I kind of think we requested it be put there. So,
It
I mean,
may be.
I'm really
It would have been
saying,
modeled after our bylaws.
yeah, it's, I'm just wondering if we're all trying to model
And-
them the same, if that needs to be
And
addressed.
I guess I'm not
For
even
my
sure
reference.
that, I'm not sure the city commission is looking
Okay.
at it that specifically. It's our proposal because we find some inherent issues with distinguishing between individual and group testimony. Because what defines a group? Oftentimes you get a group speaker and then a slew of individuals are right up behind that person to provide additional testimony. Why are we give more weight to, I mean, so the intent, I think, at the planning commission, which is where you guys spend hours and dig deep into the issues, right? Greater than most boards and commissions, and even really the governing bodies, city and county commission, who are seeing your minutes and diving deep into these issues. It was intended to shorten the night, to say, look, if we can get one person to speak and not have a lot of repeats, that's a great issue in theory. It's a great method. I just question whether it really works. And how often have we wondered, well, what group are you? I mean, you don't provide any, we don't require any documentation of who they're representing, so we don't really know. Sometimes it's an official or a formed neighborhood that's registered with the city. Sometimes it's an unformed neighborhood registers with the city. Sometimes it's a organization no one's ever heard of, frankly. So it's got a little bit of risk to it, I think. But if you're comfortable with it, I mean, that's our proposal to you in here. I'm not sure the city commission, unless Randy, you know.
It's the recommendation of the city attorney's office that we go away from giving different times for different groups that we can't really, as you say, document. It's a due process issue almost, so. And we did not see the bylaws for the Transportation Commission, so I don't know if they'll change it, if the city commission will change them or not, but if it is brought before us, we would recommend that they go to the same time for both.
So I guess I have another question kind of related to that. Excuse me. After what we...
I know, it chokes me up too. Bylaws always choke me.
After what we saw here tonight, like, there was a neighbor who was frustrated with that the applicant had more time, and then they got to go back and address. And I guess I've kind of always seen it as if it's a group. I mean, I feel like I can understand the distinction, but that has sort of been important to sort of the public
Frustration?
well, or the public, it's like a comfort thing for the public to be able to have a group, somebody from a
Well,
group.
you can
like-
still have a group representation. They just get 3 minutes
minutes.
instead of 5.
Right.
And we do a lot of opportunity for written testimony. We have pamphlets and things. I'm not sure we do we still? Okay, so I don't know if you're aware that we do a pamphlet that we put back on the table that talks about responsibilities and roles at a planning commission meeting. And the chair often will recite that process to make sure we go. And I guess I would encourage that we take the time to do that with every meeting so that people know there's an applicant presentation, there's our staff, applicant, public testimony, and then an applicant response. So you can expect that the applicant's going to get back up and respond because it's the applicant's application, right? So there's a little bit of deference there to the applicant's time in those issues. But we're not discouraging representation. We're just saying that it shouldn't be different time limits.
I think one thing that I've seen is sometimes when they hear that if you represent a group, when they hear that clause, they walk up and say, well, I represent myself and the 3 neighbors down the street that agree with me. So now I get 5 minutes to go off on and which may be their individual viewpoint, not representing those of the neighbors.
I think one of the benefits of a group is they can organize themselves to each of them use their 3 minutes wisely or consecutively as opposed to each reiterating themselves. I think there's already inherent benefit to having, for the public, to have talked to each other and kind of coordinated their efforts without giving them, without saying, you have to designate one person and they get 5 minutes. I think there's actually a lot more power in just that they can use their 3 minutes quite wisely that way. I would say I'd be very happy to see us hold the applicant's response to 5 minutes.
And that's in your bylaws. And again, stating that out and running the clock, it's not always stated, but I always run the clock, if you've noticed, and I think it gives them the impression that they're on the clock.
They know they're on the clock.
Yeah.
Some people care, some people don't.
That's right.
Karen, I agree with you. It's not a long leap for any group of folks to say, well, we'll just coordinate. And I know several neighborhood associations, formal and informal, have figured that out. So kind of what's the point of having a group with a special designation?
I've even made that recommendation to groups that want to speak as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, organize yourselves and each take a different topic.
No, I mean, I think the only, and I don't know that it's an exception that needs to be put in the bylaws, but let's say it was like a fellow organization, like a hospital board or a school district that wanted to come up and have their input on the process.
3 minutes.
Yeah, what?
3 minutes?
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I don't know what more they're going to say in 2 more minutes than they would have in 3 minutes.
Okay.
Right,
So
and again, written communication is an option. So for those lengthy details, that's the best way to do it.
And there's a little bit of discretion that the chair has as well to take things in context. If you've got a really contentious quasi-judicial application in front of you, everyone is going to expect, including staff in the attorney's office, that you hold pretty good to what's a fair process. If you're getting some information from a group that's a governmental entity, you may let them give you that information and abandon the timeline, because it's not a quasi-judicial issue, but there's some discretion there.
I would just, what Randy brought up, I think we're on a little shaky ground when we say they're a group and we really have no proof that they're a group and we're giving more time to them than somebody else. I hate to add one more layer to this, but how do we feel about this idea of, we hear from the applicant and it's this parade of it's the applicant, then the applicant's attorney, then the applicant's engineer. I mean, as long as they're within the time limit, I'm fine, but But sometimes it seems like we go a little long.
I think it's necessary, because I think those respective people provide expertise,
Sure.
and I haven't seen it taken advantage of.
Okay.
And tonight, I actually spoke with the applicant tonight beforehand, and he said, are we going to present all these things at once? I said, of course, yes, but we'll have a separate vote on each one. And he said, do I get 10 minutes? I said, you do. He said, I don't know if I'll take 10 minutes, and they didn't. They got their 3 people up there in a short amount of time, right?
They could have had 30 minutes.
But one thing
Right.
I would reiterate, I do think it's helpful for the chair to kind of each step of the way, because if you're in the audience, it may look unfair, like they're watching the clock and they're at 10 minutes, 30 seconds, and then you tell them they only get 3 minutes, but they didn't hear necessarily the chair say, applicant, you have 10 minutes per our bylaws to present your application to us. And that may be something we could get better at doing, just so people know what the time limits are.
We might be able to give the general public, make it clear that we do give some deference to the applicant and their time. That's why they get the 10 minutes and the chance to rebut as well. So,
I agree with the time limits as written.
As amended?
As amended. As written in the amendment.
I do too.
yeah, I'm happy with those.
As
There's something, we could put something in there to tell people not to repeat what the last guy said.
That's their right.
As a teacher, I'm fascinated by the unexcused and excused absence clause. That you could excuse yourself from an absence. I find that fascinating. Just,
I haven't done the truancy document.
yeah, what's the truancy?
So I did notice that it eliminated the consecutive.
Mhm.
And it's just down to 3 now.
That was Randy's language, I think. That may have been a joint one.
Yeah, I think maybe I think I worked on the language, but the terms are yours.
It's fine. I laugh. Those mean very specific things to me, so I just laugh.
Who excuses?
That's a good question.
Well, what we have written in, if I can find it
I
now.
believe it's if they call.
If they call, it's
If
excused.
you say, I am not going to make it, it's excused.
Yes.
So it's at the,
Any notice, it's not excused.
so it's at the quorum call?
I think it's.
So it's at the quorum call?
Kind of.
Well, it doesn't, it just as soon as they know,
Okay.
the way we wrote it on
So I
page
suppose I have
2
an unexcused
of the
absence.
document.
At least 24 hours prior.
Yeah.
So anytime 24 hours prior is excused.
Yeah, but Patrick, you were here. You were sitting back
I'm going to
there.
say, Scott was supposed to respond to his text, so.
How long did you
24
sit back
hours.
there before you left last month?
About an hour.
That's not long enough.
I guess not. Because I have an unexcused absence.
Yep. Better be careful.
Can I ask a question about this? The meetings are just commission meetings, not mid-month meetings, or is this all meetings? Any meeting we ever?
Great question.
There is an attendance for
So
midnight.
it's a missing person from the
Count the
last
social?
mid-month.
I didn't know where
Well-
How many more do you get away with?
The intent
Not that
of
anyone
attendance
noticed.
is on regular meetings, to conduct a business meeting. They're your bylaws if you want to give heavier weight to mid-month meetings as well. As you know, we put up an attendance sheet.
The sheet
For
of
public
shame.
shaming.
The sheet of shame.
It works.
It works, yes.
But no, the attendance we're talking about are the regular meetings.
Okay.
I think that probably should be specified.
We could do that,
Because it was before,
That
it had
almost sounds
regular
like a
meetings
motion.
in there.
yeah.
Okay, this close to sound like a motion.
All right. What do you need from us?
We need an approval of them by at least 7 members. And then if they come with changes, we'll make those changes and forward them to the city and county commissions for their approval to become effective.
I have one more question about ex parte. I could probably just ask this later. Yes, we're all here. So it's relevant to quasi-judicial proceedings. But on some of the things that we look at, it may be a legislative action that will later have a quasi-judicial component. So at what point, like, is that necessary to, I mean, like last month, it was if you spoke with someone over something that later might have a quasi-judicial proceeding, then should we go ahead and
if you're sitting in a legislative capacity, you don't have to do them at that time.
Okay.
If there's a further hearing at some point in time in the future where it becomes ex parte or becomes quasi-judicial, hopefully you will remember that earlier conversation and we'll disclose it at that point in time. So if there's some type of plan that you're working on that somehow devolves into a situation where it relates to a single tract of property, and then that might come into play.
that short-term memory concern?
That short-term memory.
Okay.
If you don't remember it, you're not actually working from a different platform of knowledge than anybody else.
Right.
So.
Ooh, I like that.
Or you could play conservative and provide your ex parte communications for just about anything we bring on the agenda, and then you're
Right.
declared everything.
Yeah, you declare everything and be safe. But you don't actually have to do it unless it's quasi-judicial.
And by the way, if I may, Commissioner Sands, I thought, did a really good declaration tonight, because not only did he say who it was, but went into depth about what it was and what he brought to the project. And that's really the purpose of it, is to put everybody on a fair playing field about what the subject matter is.
Make a motion
Please do.
to approve and send to the city commission and the county commission our revised bylaws with the one change to add regular meetings to the attendance. That's my motion. Are our mid-months not regular meetings? We may need to come up with another phrase, because they happen regularly.
I would say our business
Our
meeting.
business meetings.
There you go.
Okay.
I You're
Expecting you there anyway.
Seconded.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands. We have a motion and a second to approve with the change distinguishing types of meetings. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. 9-0 again. That is that.
So hoping we can talk about lumens. So hoping we can talk about lumens. LED lighting.
Nothing I know. It's all miscellaneous at this point. That is it. Let us adjourn.